All right. Hopefully everything works. Sorry for the delay. This is supposed to be at 7 p.m. It's now almost 8 p.m. But I apologize for the delay, but it looks like we're live. Welcome, everyone. This is second episode of INDIGOCAST. I believe that's the name. It's been a while. So with me are some great friends I've made on the internet. Here we've got Mah-Dry-Bread. He's a Let's Player. He's done some great content for a lot of games, but he's probably most famous for his Pokemon Let's Plays. We've got GriffinMuffin, who's probably most well known for his World of Warcraft and a lot of really good Witcher content, actually. So GriffinMuffin.
They can only hear you in the left ear. Yes.
Oh no! Oh no!
Down. Okay, I can tell you where to go for this.
Yep, I know exactly. I set this up like however many times. Okay.
Yeah, you got a down mix to mono and the advanced audio. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, right, great start, everybody.
Yeah, I set this up literally 5 times, so great. Well, I hope your left ear's happy. Hopefully I'm in both ears now. Sorry about that. GriffinMuffin's from Australia. He's a good buddy of mine. We also have Soul Purpose. He's just passed 50,000 subscribers. Congrats on that, Soul Purpose. You do a lot of reviews and gaming related content. I've watched a few of your videos, really high production values. So I think are we mostly 2 or 3 of us are in East Coast, right?
I am on the East Coast, yeah.
Right. I think
East Coast.
Yeah. Cool.
Or close enough. Same time zone.
Hopefully everything is all sorted. Let me know if there's any issues, any particular thing breaking or anything like that. But otherwise we should be good. Welcome everyone. How's everyone doing tonight? Good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great.
All right. So now that the disaster's over, I switched programs the last minute, which is a great idea. So do that every time you need to go live. Switch all the software you're using. So cool. So this podcast I'd like to cover. We kind of discussed some topics, and the one that kind of stuck was the best and worst game design trends that have been happening as of late. We all wrote down some ideas, so hopefully we can get through in a couple hours because Soul Purpose has to leave around 10. So let's go for that. So I'm going to do it in just kind of some random order. Here we got walking and talking cutscenes. This is an idea I wrote down. You ever play those games where you're like walking down a corridor with some other characters and they're discussing, important story elements that are all are really important and interesting and stuff, but you can't do a damn thing while it's going on and you're completely stuck.
Yeah.
It's basically a cutscene that you can't skip. You ever have that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually wrote that down as well, forgetting that you put that. I call that hold W to cutscene, where they don't want you to skip their cutscene because they worked very hard on it. And so they rip away your control as a player, and you just need to hold W until the cutscene is over. Sometimes you need to click something to say your prayers or whatever, or some completely meaningless interactable. But for the most part, it is there to waste your time because they really want you to see the cutscene every single time that you play the game. And as I said in my amazingly formatted notes there, it's like it kills any chance that you're going to have a speed run on the game unless it's Resident Evil 7 that somehow still has speed running, even though it's got so much press W to cutscene. It takes the control away from the player. It kills replayability because you don't want to go through that frustration over and over. The game's got to be really damn good for you to want to keep going back to it if it's got stuff like that. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've done the first hour and a half of Fable the Lost Chapters, the tutorial growing up thing. It's because I love the game so much. If I didn't love the game so damn much, I would go insane. So could you imagine how much worse it is if that first 1 hour and a half is hold W?
Yeah.
I think the way it can be done more organically is to do stuff like, stereotypically speaking, looking back to like the BioWare RPGs of old and Pillars of Eternity, how they do like the companion interactions and they're randomized. So you could like leave and start walking around and they'd be like, they just spark a conversation. It's a conversation you may not have heard of before, but it reveals things about characters and the events of the world that you can kind of still feel it's organic, rather than just feeling like at every point at a certain point in your adventure within an RPG, it will say the exact goddamn cutscene line of like, this world is nothing like it used to be, or something, you know?
Yeah. The world is changing. Yeah, and I totally agree. It's actually, I almost blame games like Half-Life for that, because Half-Life was incredibly good, but it did the one thing that a lot of games didn't do at the time, where the entire game from start to finish was within your control, and it was, I think, the first, not necessarily the first instance, but the most prominent early instance I remember of a game giving you the false sense of control while having unskippable events that are happening in front of you for extended periods of time. And although I think it was probably done pretty well in Half-Life compared to a lot of modern games, it's still, I think, one of the early guilty parties in terms of, hey, you're controlling, you can look around, you can move, and you're going to have to stay in this room for the next 10 minutes while we explain the plot to you.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think the important thing to like keep in mind, I think from like a development standpoint, is mechanics still say something. Well, just because you like put people in a gameplay like situation doesn't mean like it's superior to or to a cutscene in a traditional sense. I would much rather have a cutscene where it's
Me
like,
too.
you know, you can use the camera, you can allow it to kind of like, you know, use the tools of film to tell the story. And
definitely.
yeah, you don't have to have just walking around. I do think like The Last of Us, I think, has like some clever tricks to kind of make it less obnoxious, where they kind of guide you to go to a certain direction, and they don't like tell you that you're like, you know, you're on rails when you are in fact on rails. And if you know you really like dive deep into it, you can reveal the man behind the curtain. But they at least try to like convince you or persuade you to go a certain way instead of just making you press W. Like
I think it's also like finding the place to put exposition in and stuff like that depends on what the player is doing at the time. I think in relation to what you said and being on rails and stuff, like in say God of War 4, like you inevitably have to get in the boat and you have to travel to destinations to do certain quests. Like, and then at the same time, when Mimir comes along, like he can provide more context to the world and make it feel like much more larger. And it also gets across like Atreus' character of like being so curious, all from just being in a boat, just getting from one place to the other. Like that's a good place to do it. And in contrast, I can talk about Greedfall. In Greedfall, it's like this kind of a cross between open world and hub world RPG. Like you have these really thick, rich, expansive kind of hub areas, but nothing happens in between them. So it largely just feels like a very picturesque kind of empty sort of experience sometimes, because it should have had something to actually talk about as you're walking along.
Yeah, I've heard that as a common complaint about that game. Yeah, I mean, I'd add to that. All good points. I'd add to that. Like, I think there's definitely Naughty Dog games are definitely pretty guilty of that. But I think if I remember from Last of Us, they had skippable cutscenes, and then they had a lot of times there were situations where they'd bookend actions with a little bit of expository dialogue, or just like character banter or whatever. And in those particular instances, I think that's okay. Like if you're climbing up something and you say, oh man, I'm really feeling my age or whatever, that's perfectly fine because you're still doing an action during that time. But it's just the can't run, can't leave the designated path. I mean, probably one of the most guilty ones, I think, are whether or not you have, you know, control over your horse or your car or whatever. Rockstar games have a lot of just like dialogue time. We're just on the road talking, and you know, it's, I guess it's part of the game, but I know there's definitely situations there where you really have no volition or no free will. You just have to follow the path until the conversation's over. And yeah, if it's just like that, if there's no way you can really affect the world with your actions during that time, I'd rather just have a skippable cutscene at that point. But,
yeah. Like one thing I really liked, I had to batter on it again, but like God of War is like, if you say along your journey, just stop and get out of the boat, like Mimir goes, oh, we'll continue this later, or something like that. And it kind of, just that little line just makes you go, oh yeah, he was talking, rather than having like, you'll be doing having a dialogue between characters and you stop at your destination, and and the audio cuts out, you know? Yeah.
Little kind of bridges to kind of make the conversation seem a bit more real. I noticed one trend, kind of a sub trend of this, is the at least with sci-fi games or modern games, you'll be talking to somebody in person, and if you're bored, you'll just walk away. and once you get out of distance of their dialogue, they'll switch to radio. So you can start doing something in some other area, and they'll just talk to you over the radio. It's still annoying, but like I know Borderlands does that a lot. It's still a little bit like a little bit much, but it's better than having to sit there and just wait for them to complete their entire stand-up routine, and then you leave. You at least can start shooting other people or collecting loot in some other area while you're just talking over radio. But it's a problem because a lot of games are very narratively focused now, so people expect that story. But especially with replays, and I never Mah-Dry-Bread, you bring up a really good point about it must completely butcher any sort of speed runs or things like that where you just have to.
Oh God, yeah. I do a little bit of speed running, and I'm friends with a lot of speed runners. And my God, let me tell you, that whole W to cutscene thing, like every speed runner, that's what bounties get put on, is finding ways to skip those because it ruins your speed game. Nobody wants to play the game where for 15 straight minutes you, in some fashion or another, are holding W and turning the camera a little bit to try and speed things up. It is the most horrible thing in the world. Like, again, the only speed game that I can think of that is still played semi-competitively that has press W to cutscene is Resident Evil 7, and it has it multiple times. The only reason people speedrun that is because the actual gameplay of it, which is the majority of the run, is good and skill-oriented. But I can't see myself replaying Resident Evil 7, even though let's play the whole game. I really, genuinely, really enjoyed it. It's one of the few games where I found myself playing for hours and hours and just doing these bulk recording sessions because it felt like time was just flying by. I was really loving it. And that's weird for me because I'm a classic Resident Evil guy, like the old tank control one. Yeah. Those are my favorites. But I was really, really liking this. But I cannot see myself going back and playing it again because when I think about it, I don't think about how much fun I had. I think about, oh God, I'm going to have to legitimately hold W for 15 minutes because the opening is 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Of just walking slowly and holding W. Like, genuinely, that's the speedrun record for that beginning bit is like 15 minutes.
Yeah. I mean,
so that's if you do optimal movement.
Yeah, and some games have it. Imagine speedrunning Red Dead Redemption 2. I've heard that pretty common 3 to 4 hours is the runway to get through the beginning part. Like, that's got to be... Not that it was designed to be a speedrunning game, but like I think that a really like you should have a like movies, for example, have this kind of unwritten rule that by the 30-minute mark there should be an event that kind of sparks the whole story. Like you've got all your setup done, there should be an event that really sparks the story to move it forward.
Yeah.
And
pretty much
the inciting incident,
the inciting incident. Like with Matrix, almost 30 minutes exactly, Neo touches the mirror and enters the Matrix for the first time, or exits the Matrix for the first time. Like RoboCop.
That makes sense.
RoboCop, 30 minutes, you see RoboCop on screen for the very first time. Like almost every really well-paced movie, it follows that rule. Video games, you can be, Doom, you boot up the game, within 20 seconds of actual, like, being in the game, you're shooting zombies in the face. Like, you're already, like, really, really, really fast. And not every genre is going to be the same, but there's some games where, Kojima games, for example, you have to wade through a ton of stuff to even get into like any sort of meaty gameplay, other than like, press A to, acknowledge so-and-so that nanomachines exist or whatever. But yeah.
Okay. I have a modified version of that rule, kind of. In fact, I think I brought this up in my Resident Evil 7 Let's Play because I was so annoyed with the whole W to cutscene. And you might be familiar with a part of this. Back in the day in Half-Life, there was a coin term of time to crate because it came out at a time when every game had crates in it, destructible crates, and you could get items from destructible crates. That was just a ubiquitous thing in PC gaming. And so people came up with the graph of time to crate. How long average into this game before you find a crate that's destructible? And that was like a running joke. I have a thing called time to game. So my very, very vague definition of a video game is... It's going to be like video format, and it's a series of meaningful decisions that is done for entertainment. So when is the first time in the game that you have a meaningful decision? There was perhaps a yes or no choice, or something with a branching path, or you were in any danger whatsoever. In some way, you had to take control. Time time to game in Resident Evil 7 for me was 30 minutes, which is far too long.
Wow,
What
yeah.
I like is a time to game of 5 minutes. And I think a great example of how if you hook the player early with gameplay, they will sit through an enormous amount of bullshit is Metal Gear Solid 3, which is one of my favorite video games. The first time I ever played it, it had probably already been out for like 7 years, and I played it, and it gave me like 5 minutes of dialogue that I liked, and then it dropped me into the gameplay. I played the gameplay for about 10, 15 minutes, and I loved it. Then I legitimately had, I think it was 40 straight minutes of cutscene and conversation, and I sat through it, absorbing every little bit of it and loving it, because I'd already learned that I like the gameplay, and so I had made the decision that yes, I will allow myself to get invested in this because I know this is not a waste of my time because I like the game. If I don't get any gameplay before that point, I don't know. Like with Resident Evil 7, I was going out on a limb with that. 30 minutes to pick up a weapon and get into a fight, which I'm not even convinced I could have died in. Like, I think it was like one of those cutscene boss fight things where they make you feel like you're in danger, but you're not really. Like, so...
Yeah, time to game is a good metric. Like I said,
Yeah.
Doom 2016
It
and pretty
depends
much
also-
all Dooms except for maybe Doom 3, you're like in there fighting demons usually within a few seconds, like literally just a couple seconds. But I mean, not every game's necessarily going to be able to drop you in that quickly. But I think you need that kind of teaser of what you're going to get before you drop just tons of exposition. I think you're just overloading the intro, and I hate it. Like whenever. Especially as my schedule gets more filled, I hate when I have to invest like a couple hours just to get to the first save. Like in a Kojima game, you probably wouldn't be able to just play for an hour if you're starting out. You're gonna have to set aside a few hours just to be able to get anywhere you could actually save your progress. So
Yeah.
It's also difficult to kind of define what like time to game is, because game, we refer to game mechanics like combat, exploration, stuff like that. But for games like Pillars, for example, I felt when I played Pillars 2 that the game started in the first 30 seconds, because I don't know
Character creation?
No. Like when you walk, in Pillars 2, you start off as like a soul, and like you walk up and you meet like
You know what?
character.
I've played like 2 minutes of that, I think, and then I got really busy. I feel bad because I love those old school RPGs. I played like 2 minutes. I just happened to be really busy that week, and I literally forgot to ever pick it up again. But I know the exact thing you're talking about, and yes, that is a meaningful decision. I would consider the time to game on RPGs, like classic style RPGs and strategy games, is usually very fast.
It is. That's why I think I enjoy RTS and old school RPGs so much, is because
Me too.
Yeah. Like with Pillars too, like you walk in and you immediately, like, the people, I won't say too much, hopefully to not spoil it too much, but the person's just like, hey, why are you here? Why do you want to do this? I have this thing for you to do. Are you going to accept it? And you have to accept it in the first 5 minutes. And that's what makes you go, okay, well, I guess these are the stakes. And then you're thrown into the world. And then when you're thrown into the world, you don't begin combat right away. You're introduced to like one of your main party companions. And then it's like, you get absorbed into that character. He's like, hey, mate, how you doing? And then maybe 5 minutes after that is when you get your first combat thing. And but at that point, it doesn't have to be combat, because then it gives you the game, or the writers and the narrative designers give you this opportunity to be like, does this have to be combat, or can this be resolved through diplomacy? Stuff like that. And I think that is a good hook and a good thing you're talking about of time to game.
Yeah, I agree. Like it should have some sort of meaningful decision, not on rails movement, but some sort of do I have to aim? Do I have to make a dialogue decision? Do I have to search? Do I have to be, notice something, like something that actually requires some input output, not just, pushing forward, not just, pushing up on the analog stick, or not pressing A to skip, to just go through a series of dialogue. Because some, I wouldn't consider a linear dialogue progression. Just press A to continue to the next scripted, dialogue. I don't think that's necessarily interaction. It has to have some sort of choice, some sort of meaningful choice. Whether it's, am I going to aim for the head or aim for the body, or should I take a left or should I take a right, or should I say yes?
Move and don't die.
Press X to not die. Yeah. Stuff like
that. I mean, I guess it's a slightly debatable with press X to not die, but I guess that depends on the kind of game, That's the thing, is it's not a fucking solid 100% time to game is always a good metric. It's got a lot of wiggle room.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Exactly.
It depends on genres, as we pointed out. Yeah.
Mhm.
Cool. Yeah, just to get on the next one because we could probably talk all day about that one.
Yeah.
So I'll grab one from GriffinMuffin here. So you wrote quests in some games becoming more explained and believable.
Mm.
Want to elaborate on that one since you came up
Yeah.
with that
So, as some of you may know, I'm currently working on a script for the Outer Worlds for one of my videos. And one thing I felt when I was playing Outer Worlds is the ability as a player to go to the quest giver, why do I have this quest? Why don't you do it? And they'll give you some response of like, oh, well, I'm busy, or like, oh, I'm testing you and stuff like that. And it's like, even though it's like, it's such an insignificant thing to have a dialogue option that says, why am I doing this? It allows the player it's a freedom of agency of to be like, but why am I here? And in like,
Mhm.
it's common in the last 2 Obsidian games I've played that the game or characters within the game themselves ask, why are you doing this? And it's such a good thing to do because a lot of RPGs back in the day kind of just took it for granted that you're going to hop into a game, you're going to do the quest and be the hero. When it's like, but why? Why do you do this? You know, I felt that's a really good thing. I think it should be picked up more in terms of narrative design and in the RPGs that we have coming up.
Yeah,
That's pretty much the point.
No, that's a great point. I think a lot of games could learn from just overall just good narrative writing. I mean, one of the strongest, most important points of any coherent story is just motivation. You know,
Mhm.
what's the motivation of this villain? What's the motivation of your character? Why is this person doing this thing? You know, how did this person get to this state to do this thing? I mean, some some great examples from like non gaming media. I think is you ever watch the Daredevil show from Netflix?
Yeah.
Did it
Nope.
excellent. Nope.
I don't.
It's
sorry,
it's a
the
good
only
show.
TV I watch is wrestling. That's it.
Okay. Yeah, you got the wrestling, but even
Fair
even
enough.
wrestling, it's like you got the heel, and like they've got these long stories like, oh, you bested
Mhm.
me 3 years ago, now I'm gonna get my revenge or whatever.
Yeah.
That is a terrible recap of a wrestling story.
I don't watch wrestling, so there you go. But
well, I will introduce you one day. It is my favorite form of art.
yeah, no, I respect it a lot more than I've heard some like documentaries and things talk about it, but yeah, I mean, like for example, just to use Daredevil as an example, has an incredibly well reasoned and well developed villain in that series whose motivations are very clear. So you always know why he's feeling this way or why he's doing these things, and with video games, quite often you're just expected to be the hero. It's like, why are you saving this town? Because I'm the hero. Why are you killing this town? Because I'm not the hero. Like, I agree with you in that explaining motivations and also hinting at repercussions. And that's one thing that Obsidian games do really well is like they have a lot of morally gray decisions where you may do this thing with the best intentions, but you end up starving these other people because they took away their food source, or you might help, group A, but group B suffers for it, or things like that. And, it is a little bit of like a, kind of wrenching your, tugging at your heartstrings, for dramatic effect. But in reality, almost every major action in reality does affect things in good and negative ways. So I like that the kind of, there isn't a perfect solution for everything. I like that. That's kind of been a theme of some recent Obsidian games. I noticed that too.
Yeah, definitely I won't say much, but definitely in Outer Worlds, what you talked about of like there's never a perfect solution is definitely there, and that's what kind of kept me going with the story until the very end. Was like I was at every point where it was a major decision. I'm like, what's going to happen? Usually in some RPGs, you kind of just go, oh, the guy asked to save his goat, you save his goat, you bring it back, and he's like, oh, thank you, you have my goats back, and it's like quest completed.
Here's
But-
50 gold and a ring.
Yeah. Or you come back, but it would be so much more interesting. Like you come back and the goat is actually like, I don't know, a demon in disguise, and then morphs, and you're like, oh, I have to deal with this goat now that's now transformed into a demon. Stuff like that. It's these sort of like reversals and stuff like that to actually kind of keep quest design interesting.
Yeah, I know. One good example, almost a carbon copy of what your example was in one quest. I won't say the specifics, but in Divinity Original Sin 2, quite often you'll be doing
Such a good game.
Yeah, great game.
Yeah.
A lot of the quests you'll do the most earnestly do what you thought was best, but end up causing a lot of harm because of it, because you didn't know something like, for example, a demon, or, that there was a reason why, that person was up there, doing this thing, and not, there's repercussions for your actions, and you can, a couple of those quests, I'm like, oh man, I feel really bad about that, because I didn't mean for that to happen, but I caused all this harm. And so, yeah,
There's a reason the Fire Slug Queen was sassing me.
Yeah.
I love that area.
No, it's great. There's just so much to explore in that game, but yeah, I could talk about
God,
that for long.
so much. I love that. Not a spoiler, because it's in the first 30 minutes of the game. You're at a fort where you're held kind of captive, roughly. And there's 100 ways to get into the castle you need to get into, and then get out of the city, and that's your whole first act of the game, basically. Yeah. There's a billion ways you can do it, and it's so creative and so cool. I have new game-itis when it comes to really good RPGs like that, where I just make new characters, new classes over and over. I'm like, what if I do it this way? What if I do it this way? And I love doing that. I've gotten out of that castle 100 different ways, and every single one I felt like such a goddamn genius when I did it. I loved every second of it, and I've not played anywhere past that because I have new game-itis.
Oh god.
Is that
but I had a blast.
What was that, Griffin?
Was that Divinity Original Sin you were talking about? Original Sin 2 or another one?
Original Sin 2.
Yeah, 2, yeah.
I
got
a good game.
4 hours into it, and I had some trouble getting into it, which is a funny thing, because a lot of people were like, oh, you'll love it. I'm like, I'm having trouble getting into it, but I do remember, is it Fort Joy you were talking about?
Yeah, Fort Joy. That I loved that place so much.
Yeah, you can easily spend 10, 20 hours in the first act in Fort Joy, and the second act, you only need to do about maybe 20-30% of it. There's probably 40 hours of optional activities in the second act alone. There's a lot to do in that game if you really want to explore every nook and cranny. But
I think one thing that didn't help. Oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I think one thing that didn't help for me when I was trying to get into Divinity Original Sin 2 was the I don't think I made the right character that allowed me to really kind of. I made 3 different characters, and I had trouble kind of feeling I feel good. I feel good when I play it. But the tactics themselves, the actual combat, I love really tactical combat, and that's one thing that did keep me going with it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it has a little bit of a runway. I didn't get into it that much when I first played it with some friends, but I started it again, and once you get past the first couple hours, and the game starts opening up, you realize just how crazy open it is. It's a really, even the tutorial island is got a lot of different options, a lot of different things you wouldn't even notice were there. It's got whole systems upon systems and things like that. You get arrested and put into the prison, things like that. Just the first part of the entire game. But did you have any thoughts on that, Soul Purpose?
I did want to ask real fast about Divinity Original Sin 2. Did any of you beat that with multiple players?
Oh Lord,
nope.
I'm 90 hours.
Or beat it at all, I guess.
I'm 90 hours into it, and it's probably 2/3 through the game. So yeah, it's
okay.
It's if you spend the time. Again, I probably put my fiance and I probably put 60 hours into Act 2. You can probably get through Act 2 in about 20 if you just kind of do the things you need to do. But again, what's cool about Act 2 is that, actually, not to spoil anything, there's so many different activities. And you just need to do I think 3 of them. So whatever 3 you pick is up to you. So if you even do a quick playthrough throughout the game, you can choose other paths, and you'll have a very, very different experience, because there's whole other areas you might have completely missed. So I'd say you, roughly speaking, you could probably finish the game about 40 hours if you just kind of quick, 30-40 hours. But if you want, you could spend over 100, I think, easily.
Yeah, I know I did.
Cool. All right, I'll grab actually one of your contributions, Soul Porpoise. So games that use their mechanics to help tell a story. So what are some good examples from you on that? Good games that do that either well or poorly.
Yeah, so there are a lot, and I think this is one of the design trends that I'm pretty optimistic about. Generally speaking, some of them a lot of actually a lot of games fail on this, but the ones that are doing it well seem to be really like leaning into it. The one that I played most recently that like I can't stop gushing about is the Fallen Order Star Wars game.
Oh, okay.
If any of you have played that, it does that extremely well. And I don't want to get too much into spoilers, but like it does Star Wars so well. Like it's something to the point like where I'm getting a new perspective on it. And it's making me rewatch the movies and like kind of view this from a perspective like, because I know I've talked about Joseph Campbell in my other videos, who did the research on the hero's journey and everything.
Yeah.
And he talks about how Star Wars, the original Star Wars, was a really great, like it does this perfectly. And this is of course something that Lucas studied and implemented in his original scripts. And yeah, like it's about as accurate a representation of the hero's journey, along with like the struggles with the combat, which I know is difficult for some. It's not too bad, but it's definitely harder. I'm trying very hard not to compare it to Souls. And
It's comments in this.
yeah, I'm sure they're calling me out. Yeah, like I think that's part of it. Like there's a part where Joseph Campbell talks about how there is in the original Star Wars a very like specific call to like the samurai warrior and how that's embedded in the story, and that's exactly how the game makes you feel. It's you can feel that as part of the story, and it's fantastic.
That's good to hear.
Yeah,
I've been wanting to play it. I love Respawn, and I think Respawn has done nothing but pretty great games. Even if I don't necessarily play their battle royale, I at least respect that they made one of the best battle royale games, and technically speaking, and everything. But yeah, they do a great job, and bit of because I'm just an absolute sponge for trivia. Their logo is actually Braille. I think it's the R, I think, or I think R for Respawn and Braille is their logo, which they did that because their game philosophy is all about feeling. If you don't know, they were the guys who
It's clever.
basically did the most successful Call of Duty games, Modern Warfare and Modern Warfare 2. Those guys, Vince Zampella and Jason West, I think. They did a really great job with those games. Those games were so successful, especially in console, because of how good they felt. They sacrificed a lot of things, graphic fidelity, resolution. That game actually ran at sub HD, but they did so many things to make that game buttery smooth, even on the 360 and the PS3. So they were all about getting that really, really good feedback and gameplay loop and that feeling of gameplay, just the right. Tweaking it just to feel just right. So I could definitely see how they could be. I've been wanting them to make a fantasy RPG forever. I think they do an amazing job about it. And I thought I heard something about that, but I think they got given the Star Wars treatment. But it's good that a really good Star Wars game finally came out, because it seemed like everything with this new EA deal kind of had some sort of horrible problem bogging it down. The Amy Hennig project, I was really disappointed.
Yeah.
They never got off the ground, which I'm sure that would have been pretty great. But
yeah,
I have no doubt it would have been.
I've got an example, unless you guys have an example of a game that does mechanics, story through mechanics really well.
Not at the top of my head, no.
Yeah. One that is kind of Total Biscuit used to talk about it a lot. But it's one of those games that's really hard, because to explain how it does it, you kind of have to spoil the best part of the game. But it is a really good job. I can describe the basics without spoiling too much. But Brothers, Tale of Two Sons, which is a terrible title, but a really good game. Have you guys played it?
Yeah.
I vaguely know what it is. I've seen a little bit and stuff, and I've heard Total Biscuit back in the day rave on about how good it is.
Yeah, it basically
listened to a video essay on it.
Yeah, his favorite game actually was my favorite game, which was the original Deus Ex. But he loved Brothers so much that
Good game.
that became his number one after he played it. The
Wow.
thing is that it's a game without any dialogue. It's all just like kind of kind of like Sims language, like made up language,
Yeah.
and actions. What was really cool about the game is that I don't know if you'd necessarily have the same experience on mouse and keyboard, but with controller, right stick, right trigger, left stick, left trigger.
Yeah.
One half of your controller is one brother, the other half is the other brother. So you control two brothers at the same time. And throughout the game, you create this really great kinship and kind of cooperation with yourself. It's like a co-op game with yourself, basically. And you have to kind of make them work together. And because you're kind of fighting with like one side of your body and one other side of the body, you kind of have that sort of initial struggle. But then your teamwork you can eventually do things with yourself again, but you're kind of developing it as a team, and you're able to play the game better as you go on because you get more used to doing two things simultaneously. It's a really great way of doing it, and actually adds a lot of character and a lot of like that connection. Even though it's a single player game, you have that connection like as if you're playing with another person. And anyway, they develop that later on in really interesting ways. But one of the best ideas that the game has, easily the best idea the game has, is just how kinetic and how immersed you get because you're literally controlling two different things at the same time.
So I don't know what the spoiler is or what they do later to develop that and thus,
Yeah.
create a game
I know
playthrough
it, but I
or
want
a
to
start
say
through mechanics. I don't know what it is, so I'm just going to assume that at some point you get morphed into some kind of horrible chimera monster with your brother.
Exactly
And that from
yeah.
then on the rest
Wow.
of the game you're playing it like Octodad, where like every button is a different limb and you're like just knocking
can't
shit
say it.
over.
You turn
Look,
into the
you don't need to say it. I was right, right?
you turn into the guy at the end of Total Recall where you have like a top body and then you have a little bite maybe at the bottom. It's like
Whoa, Total Recoil spoiler. Oh
Exactly.
man, I'm unsubscribing.
Yeah, Total Recall. I'm sorry, I spoiled a 1990 film. It's
I
Yeah.
actually
released so
haven't
recently.
seen it, but it's okay. I won't remember what you just said by the time I
Good
watch
movie.
it.
Good movie. Paul Verhoeven's the man. I'm actually covering him in my that movie in my next video.
Oh,
But
It's awesome.
I can see that.
yeah, no, it's definitely hard because so many things have been tried, but you know it when you play it, where you're like, wow, this game really handles this particular story or theme of the game. It doesn't necessarily have to be storyline, but like the theme of the game. If the theme of the game is, for example, a great example of that was Octodad. The theme of that game is how to not be awkward as a freaking octopus,
Yep.
and the game nails that really well because it's impossible
so
to do
good.
basic things like it, even just if you want to drive yourself insane, do the two-player mode where one person plays half the octopus, the
Yep.
other player plays the other half of the octopus, and even walking is a challenge in that game. So no, it's great, and that's why I think we're going to see a lot of really great mechanics emerge in like game jams and the indie scene because they can
Yeah.
come up, they can afford to just like waste a couple days or weeks on just trying out ideas and seeing what works. And I think that eventually somebody will nail something, and maybe they won't get it 100%, but somebody will take that idea and say, hey, we've got a much bigger way we can apply that idea.
Yeah.
I think also with indie and game jams and stuff, you're not confined to making something that's gonna be like I'm not really sure of the result of game jam products, but I'm gonna take a guess and say like you don't have to like make them marketable and be like, oh, let's sell them. They're usually just for the public consumption of people, if I'm correct, if that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually just for the competition, and I think some of them
Exactly.
they get like a bonus or like a small grant or something like that. But
Yeah.
sometimes
So you can make it like experimental and stuff, you can try out new things without having like whoever's in charge of the money, so to speak, to be like, no, we can't sell this, no one will like it.
Yeah, with those things, there is no like board of investors saying no, let's go with something proven. Let's do a shooter that has these successful things. It's like let's just do something completely crazy and see if it sticks. And so I think that's kind of the new frontier of innovation is the smaller, more risky experimental projects that you can afford to try something completely unproven before.
reminds me of I remember I watched this video about like work productivity, and it talked about how at some software companies they do this thing where like I think it's like once a month or once a week or something. They just say to their software engineers, make your own thing, make it. You'll be paid for it, like normal hours and stuff. Just make it and give it to us by the end of the week, and that's it. There's something you think might improve the company, and they found that that was actually a big generation of a lot of new ideas. Like there's this unrestricted thing of like, go do what you want, you know, and they bring it back and be like, whoa, this is actually a really good idea. And it's like letting creative people give, like taking off the restrictions of creative people actually generates like completely novel ideas.
Yeah, I can totally see how that works. I mean, I do some development, probably more of a graphics guy, but yeah, doing just, do exactly this, and this, and all detailed out, and you just follow those letters to a T, you become kind of a robot, even as a graphic designer. So when somebody says, hey, I want this, just do whatever you want, it's really great to stretch the creative muscles or just think outside the box and do something different. And you kind of really need that, or else you're just going to be really just kind of, running on fumes, creatively speaking, or if you're instructed to do every single thing you do, you're just basically, a pair of arms that, somebody else is ordering around. So I could definitely see how that can definitely squelch innovation. Let me hop on to another point here.
Sure.
I think the second one that you brought up, Mah-Dry-Bread, games that put you into gameplay before it puts you on the main menu, so you don't get a chance to do your settings, so the resolution is wrong, and you're currently going to have. Okay, I get what you mean. So games that.
You're not gonna read the whole thing word for word? Come on.
All right, it was cool in X-Men 2 Clone Wars because that was 1995 on the Sega Genesis. It's not cool in 2019 on your PC game that you just dropped $80 Canadian on. So
I'm just curious what game this is now.
Yeah,
sounds great.
What X-Men 2 Clone Wars? It's this awesome platformer action game on the Genesis where before it even shows you the Sega logo like they'd always do in Genesis games, immediately drops you in gameplay. You're in like this winter wonderland fighting stuff as a random X-Men. You don't even pick yours at the very start. And your song changes depending on which one of the like 8 X-Men you were given. And you do a whole level, and then it gives you the Sega logo and gives you the breakdown of the story and takes you into level 2. And like no other game did that at the time, and it was the coolest thing.
It's pretty avant-garde, yeah.
Modern PC games kind of need an options menu where you pick your resolution, because I've never had a game natively understand I have a 2K monitor and not a 1080 one, and so the resolution's always wrong, and so everything on the other monitors are freaking out because I'm booting a new game and I'm taking my headset off because I don't want to go deaf on the new game, and then it decides to not take me to the main menu where I can go to the options menu and make myself not deaf and see things correctly, which is just fantastic. Thank you for that. I'm so happy that only AAA games do that. And the ones that I have to pay the most money for are the ones that respect me the least in terms of, it's a PC game, I need to do my options.
Yeah.
X-Men did it better.
Especially your PC. Like I feel I've got a 1440p ultra wide at a very odd refresh rate. So no game gets it right. Or they force VSync, and I've got a G-Sync, so I need to turn off VSync. I need to set to 3440 by 1440. I need to set to, cap at 100 frames per second.
Yep.
I need to set shutter resolution to under ultra, because shutter resolution will absolutely kill my performance and all this other stuff. And, and then sometimes you can spend a good, 10, 20 minutes tweaking things and all kind of stuff. I'll also say that games that have like benchmarks and ways to test your settings before you get into the game are great. Like I think Ubisoft has actually been pretty ahead of the curve on that. They actually usually have a benchmark for last few games I played with them.
WWE games have it for some reason.
That is random. But
it's a weird game to have it, but they have it. And I usually use DX Story, by the way. You can get that for free. Just all you need is the trial to do frame limiting. I use that to limit the frames in games, so I don't need to use VSync, because VSync is a glitchy piece of crap.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's always really tricky, but yeah, I mean, I like the avant-gardeness of kind of starting you in the middle of something before they, kind of cinematic, where before you do a cold open, so to speak, before you do credits or whatever. But I think in
Yeah.
modern PC gaming, where it's unfortunately that's a little bit too much of an ask because you may not
Yeah,
even
it just doesn't work on
think-
PCs.
not really.
The best example I can think of like, you know, what you said of like doing a bit of gameplay, then the cinematic Legacy of Kain Blood Omen, yeah? That did it. If I remember rightly.
I just played
On the
that.
PS1?
I just played
I didn't
that,
play it, but
Did
that's
you
the
really?
one with
A month
that's the
ago.
infamous line in the instruction manual about the grunts and poofs mean that Kane is taking damage or whatever, right? There was like an early internet meme about that. Was it
think
that
so.
game?
I think
Okay.
so. I
I
can't
think it was
remember
that
off the
game.
top of my
Oh,
head.
I'm a genius. You see, I pulled that one out.
I'm really disappointed in myself. I literally live streamed the first 4 hours of that game like a month ago. I'm not even exaggerating. So,
I saw you were playing Shadowrun. That was awesome, but I didn't have time to like hang out. I was watching it silently for a little while. It was cool.
yeah, I know Shadowrun SNES was great. I want to play the Genesis
Yeah.
version now because I've heard they're both really good in different ways. But
They're very different. I think it was the SNES one that was more of an RPG. I liked that one more. The Genesis one, if I'm remembering right, was more of an action game.
yeah, the Genesis one is kind of remembered because it had a really good like cyberspace mode where you go in and like hack into the Matrix and stuff like that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it does it pretty well. So I want to dig into that because for my next video actually. But yeah, I totally lost track of what we're talking about. But oh yeah.
That's okay. I'm here.
No,
Sorry.
yeah. I mean, I think you could do that. Like, here's my proposal: if you're gonna do a cold open, have a cold open, but if you press escape, there's options menu.
There you go.
Yeah,
I'm fine with that.
That'd be fine. Do a cold open the first time you boot up the game before you have a save game. But if you press escape, have an options menu, because that's the one annoying thing is if like you get into a game and there's something 3D or graphics related and you can't change the options yet. That's one thing that's always been really frustrating is that you're like not quite into the game yet and you can't change anything.
And it also some people have problems with like this is, I'm not sure if this is 100% accurate, but there's some people who need to actually go into the settings for any game they play and like fiddle with the field of view stuff because it can cause them to be like motion sickness and stuff.
Yep.
And if you have
I do
that with a cold open, like you can't change it and people can get actually physically ill from it.
It's why I couldn't play Destiny 1, because I don't own a TV, I just have a capture card, and I got Destiny 1 for free with my PlayStation 4 back when I bought it. I played I don't like FPSs on controller in the first place, but I decided to give it a try because my friends liked it. And I almost immediately was sick to my stomach because the game had no FOV slider, and I'm playing it on a monitor, so it's like right in front of me, even though it's a game probably meant for a TV across the room. I immediately wanted to throw up, and I just couldn't play. And like I played plenty of FPSs. My channel used to be very Payday 2 oriented for quite a while because I really, really like that game. So I can do super fast paced whipping the camera around FPS, but not if it's super zoomed in. I can't. So that's like a gameplay thing. I literally can't play that.
Yeah. So, Sin Forgiver from chat actually brought up a good point I was going to bring up earlier. We used to have a lot of launchers, which you could do like it was just like a Windows window where you could do like settings, like resolution, basic settings and stuff like that. A lot of games, like
a lot of companies are bringing that back.
They are. Stellaris has it.
Bethesda,
Stellaris. I was playing that yesterday.
Bethesda never dropped it. There's certain settings you can't actually change while in game with, at least up to Skyrim and possibly Fallout 4. You couldn't even change some basic stuff in game. So some games never dropped it, but yeah.
Oh God, Fallout 4.
Yeah.
It is kind of
I had to go to the .ini file to fix shit in that.
Oh yeah, me too. When I was playing it on my new monitor, I had to go in there and fix all the resolution and frame rate.
Piece of crap.
Yeah, they're particularly behind the times in terms of graphics options,
And button remapping, you can't untie the melee button from the grenade button. So if the game lags, because it always does, it'll think you're trying to grenade with a Molotov at your own feet while you're in melee range. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And that is definitely a problem of, it's also on console, so they had to dumb down the controls, and they had no regard for PC players at all with that.
That actually dovetails nicely into a point I had written down here, which is console-specific controls.
Hey, I didn't mean to segue.
Segue. I'll jump on it when I see it. That's
Man, I'm a genius.
My most immediate examples, and I'm sure there's plenty of them, but I know double contextual button presses, which aren't always bad, but sometimes are really bad, where like the same button will do like 5 different things depending on where you are. And sometimes you want to, open a door, but instead you activated dynamite, or, you want to pick up something.
Yep.
And instead you swap your weapon with that thing you don't want, or, you want to,
Usually when you press hold on that button, like hold does a different effect. Yeah.
And honestly, for certain things, it makes sense. Like, for example, one of the common things, and I'm actually okay with this, is like tap a button to pick up, hold a button to swap.
Yep.
I can understand
Yeah,
that.
that's fine. That's totally fine.
Yeah. That's fine.
But when you're like activating things instead of like leaning against cover, or there's been a lot of like really things that get you killed. Where it starts a long animation, you did not mean to do that, and you'll die. But one of the things that I go ahead.
You're hitting E to get the spear you just threw out of that zombie in 7 Days to Die. Instead, some door in your peripherals just closes and you just get mauled. That happens so often. Like you are directly on the thing and it says E and you hit E. Some door, you just telepathy. Thanks. That's what I wanted to do.
I had that happen with Greedfall when I was playing on the PC. It would just be like, you'll be near a door or something and you companion or something, it'd be like you'll just like teleport to the door and be like and walk through like no.
I hate that so much.
Yeah, and it's meant to make the game simpler, but sometimes it makes just doing basic actions very difficult. And almost the reverse problem is like I don't know if you ever played Battlefield. Battlefield lets you double or triple bind certain keys. You can actually have multiple actions attached to a certain key. That can get really confusing, but I can understand why they have that option. So in case you do want to have contextual keystrokes or whatever, but that can get pretty weird. But one of the examples that I immediately thought of was like the lockpicking system in games like Elder Scrolls or Fallout, where you're like, you move one arm and then you move the other arm and like pull it. And it's not the end of the world to do it with mouse and keyboard, but it's obviously designed for the two joysticks, and there's no real keyboard or mouse keyboard equivalent for that, so you're just kind of like weaseling around with your WASD keys and your mouse.
On Oblivion, it's really odd.
I was gonna say, it's mouse controlled, isn't it?
You flick your mouse, like you move your mouse up to like, it's like it's such an awkward thing to do.
Why
really
wouldn't they just do arrow keys for that? Like, there was no reason not to. Like, I bet you there's a mod for that that's like top mod on all of the Nexus mod manager is probably making the lockpicking bound to like WASD or arrow keys, because why was it ever bound to mouse? Like, that is one of the dumbest things I could think of to bind that to. Whereas in Skyrim, I thought it was perfectly comfortable with mouse and keyboard.
Yeah.
No, that was fine. The Skyrim one was actually pretty nice. Yeah.
That was fine. I never had an issue with it.
Complain about. Yeah.
Yeah, I recently played Alpha Protocol, and I think the lockpicking.
Love that game. Just got taken off Steam recently.
Yeah, I bought a copy beforehand, so I'm grandfathered in.
Nice.
But yeah, you can't buy it. You can't buy it off of Steam anymore. I think it was music licensing or something like that.
I believe it was. Same reason as Alan Wake.
Yeah.
Is music license is expiring.
Like, we got warning on that one. I think like there was a sale, like
there
for
was
90% off or something. I had no idea Alpha Protocol was going off, so I missed that.
I know. I didn't know till I looked recently. I went to go look at what the achievements were or whatever, and it's like, you can't buy it anymore. That's a shame, because like that game got shit on pretty hard when it came out. But I always thought it was really fun. Like
that's what I keep hearing.
The first country of the game, like the first little act of the game, the stealth mechanics are kind of bad because it's based mostly around your bonuses, not around the base of it, and so it felt like it wasn't quite right. And so the people who liked it were usually playing a soldier, and the people who didn't were usually playing stealth. But once you get past the first country, you're only like 1/5 the way into the game. And the entire rest of the game, if you're doing stealth like I was, because I like stealth games, it actually feels really, really great. I thought that was a fantastic game. And it had some of the absolute best branching decisions that actually impacted the entire rest of the game. And it was an Obsidian game, so I'm sure that won't surprise you to learn that they know how to rate certain, like, there's drastic differences based on little dialogue choices you pick, and it's stuff that you can foresee in some way. And the only reason you don't see it coming sometimes is because you're so used to it not mattering in other games. And they do such a great job of that, of like sometimes you don't want your handler to like you as much. Sometimes you want to be a dick to them a little bit because they'll be less likely to compromise the mission if they like you just a little bit less. You don't want them to hate you, but like just that little nuance of it's the same reason why a doctor can't operate on their son. Of they're going to make bad decisions because they're too invested in the person. There was stuff like that implemented into the game. Like, it is so cool. Alpha Protocol is such a cool game. And so many people never got to learn how cool it was because it had this rough patch in the beginning of it. And so a lot of players and reviewers didn't think much of it past that rough patch in the beginning. So, that sucks because that game is cool as hell.
People, unfortunately.
Go give it a try again sometime because it really is great.
If I can find it, I will absolutely try.
Yeah, I don't know if it's sold anywhere online anymore. You might need to go search through them sketchy websites.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I think
totally legitly require it.
I think no, don't quote me on this. I think if you have a legit key, you can activate it within Steam. You just can't buy a new key. Like if you were to get an unactivated PC key or something like that.
I don't want to advocate G2A, but that might be the only way to diverge a step.
Wow, the necessary evil.
Yeah, I don't want to advocate that. I used to be partnered with them a long time ago. Then when it came out that they were like using stolen credit cards and stuff, I immediately dumped it. I was making good money, but I dumped that because no, that's not cool. And they're doing it to this day, as far as I know. They never cleaned up their act.
Yeah, and when people point out, how bad their system is, they get banned and stuff like that. Not a nice company.
Oh, they do a lot of scummy things. Like they have reoccurring costs for things that you might accidentally opt into, and you're not allowed to opt out of the subscription service until the last day of every month, and they don't tell you that, so you always forget. It's awful. They do so many awful business practices.
Well, I was going to point out, Mah-Dry-Bread, you're fantastic at segues because you. In digging into Alpha Protocol, you brought up another point.
Yeah,
it's both it's kind of a negative, but you brought up the reverse of that, which is a positive. Is that the negative is bottlenecked endings? Like everybody mentions the meme extreme is Mass Effect 3, where you do all these crazy things that go super wide in the middle, and at the end you got pretty much the same decision.
I don't know the ending. I haven't played the Mass Effect series either. Then a little bit of 1 and a little bit of 2, and I liked them, and I want to play through the whole series in a row. But I've heard how legendarily bad the ending of Mass Effect 3 is, to the point that people usually refer to it as you pick your color of explosion. Which I don't know what that means, but I'm sure I don't know what that means, but I'm sure I'll laugh my ass off in like 200 hours when I beat the whole series.
No, they're all three. I can't really speak for Andromeda, but the first 3 are definitely worth playing, even despite the ending. But
I'm sure they are. I had a lot of fun with what little I played.
And what's really frustrating is that was one of the few trilogies that actually have a story progression and the carry over your save game. One game to the next, so you're not only ending one game, you're ending 3. So, but it is frustrating not to get on the whole rank because that game's been ranted about for like 10 years. But games that have the appearance of a really, really expansive storyline that branches out in so many different ways, but in the end, you're kind of down to just all slightly varying versions of the same ending, or basically the same ending, but somebody else dies or whatever, and it's. And I know why they do it, because it's incredibly difficult to develop so many different, ways of very different, outros and ending levels and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it is one of those things that comes up again and again, where a game branches out, but essentially it leads you back in, thick in the middle, but slim at the end.
Same thing as illusion of choice. Like they give you the means to do all this stuff inside the game, but the ending's always going to be the same. And it's really odd sometimes when these games get bottleneck endings, because it's like sometimes these games don't have full-on cinematics to describe their endings. They're literally just title cards of just like, little image and just like text or like a voiceover. And it's like, what would be the extra effort of saying, okay, let's have a neutral ending where this happens, or we'll have like a slightly worse ending where this happens, and just have a guy do a voiceover? Like, what is really the limiting factor in you deciding to do a bottleneck ending?
Like Fallout 1 and 2, especially 2, did exactly what you're talking about so well, where they have modifiers of every city you've been to, and different modifiers of if these different things happen, this is what'll be the ending. And they show a picture of it and they explain what your impact on the world was.
Yeah.
That's so easy to do, and it turns out so great. And then did we
Pillars
all
2 did this really well.
There you go. Do we all remember the original vanilla ending for Fallout 3? Where there's four. I held 3. There's 4. And it's just a mix and match of 2 different things. Did you do the water purifier thing? And did you walk in, or did you tell the lady you just met to walk in? And it's one line is the lone wanderer learned many things, and one of them was sacrifices. He sacrificed himself to blah blah blah. Or alternatively, he learned many things, but one wasn't self-sacrifices. He told lady to walk into the blah blah. And the other one is he was a really cool dude, and he purified the water, and everything was hunky dory. Or he was a really bad dude, and he didn't purify the water, and there's no reason he wouldn't do that. That was the whole ending, and there was no post game originally until DLC came out. Because when DLC comes out, it's just like change takes a long time, so you're back in the world now and you can keep playing. You know, like what Fallout 2 did many years prior. In vanilla, the game just ended and you can't play anymore, and it's just like you were good or bad. Bye.
Having absolute like moral absolutes for what like your decisions are in an RPG is kind of like, it doesn't really feel like it's kind of a cheap sort of thing, you know. That's why a lot of people look to like Obsidian, and they're like, oh man, they make like really in-depth sort of RPGs, and they do a lot of like morally ambiguous things. And yeah, I think I'll speak only for Pillars, is that they definitely pulled off the morally ambiguous sort of decisions and a very multifaceted world in that game.
That actually makes me think of Fallout 1, where in the original development of Fallout 1, there was a quest line that's very major that was going to go very differently. So in the Fallout 1 that we all got, there's a place called Junktown, and it's there's 2 warring factions in there. There's the sheriff and the sheriff's department and everything, and then there's a casino in town called Gizmos, I think, because it's run by Gizmo. And he's this fat evil guy who does like assassinations and stuff. So when you walk into town, you can either side with the sheriff and try to take down Gizmo. You catch him in the act of admitting to trying to hire a hit on the sheriff, or you can side with Gizmo. And if you side with the sheriff and you kill Gizmo, then the ending is like everything was great and the city flourished. If you kill Kalian Darkwater, which is the sheriff, then it's everything sucks and Gizmo sucks. But originally, what they were planning for the endings to be based on that is they wanted to be more ambiguous, where if you kill Gizmo, then the ending would be the city's economy stagnates because Killian Darkwater, whose name sounds really evil, but he wasn't evil at all in the finished game, he ends up becoming really authoritarian because there's no one to challenge his rule. And the economy stagnates and the place never really grows. Whereas if you end up killing Killian and you side with Gizmo, he's really corrupt, but his casino expands, his business empire expands, jobs open up, and the city flourishes. And that would be the only time in the game where the obviously good thing and the obviously bad thing don't result in what you think that they would. But they didn't end up going with that, which is so fascinating.
I remember reading about
such
that.
a disappointment.
Yeah, I remember reading about that, where they felt it was a bit too much of a betrayal to the player, and so they decided to go with the obvious, side with the sheriff, things go good. Side with the corrupt, gambling, whatever guy, things go bad. But I remember reading about that, and I love Junktown. It was actually the Fallout 1 demo was actually just a self-contained altered version of Junktown. It was pretty great. I'm just looking at another great example, again by Obsidian. Fallout New Vegas had one of the most notoriously variable endings of any game, really. I'm looking at it now. There's 29 slides, and some of these slides, it kind of stitches together an ending out of 29 with 29 steps, and each one of these slides, like one of them has 11 alternates of that one slide. So some are very, very specific, like who was even the Caesar at the end of the game, because you could end up killing the one that was in charge, and that drastically changes so many of the outcomes, because a new guy who's a total warmonger takes over. That changes every single ending, no matter who you side with, because one of the biggest factions in the whole game has a different leader. Yeah, I mean, you can just do the math and you see with various different versions of each slide, you can see hundreds, if not thousands, of different versions of the ending. I mean, it's and again, that's probably easier to do than to animate in an incredibly elaborate cutscene that only happens one way or the other. I'd rather have something that reflects my actions rather than
Exactly.
have something that's a bit
Mm-hmm.
prettier. And
I want to feel like I made an impact on the world, and not because the game funneled me into being the chosen one. Like, I always thought being the chosen one in a game is kind of lame. I want to be in a world that doesn't care about me, and I make it care. Which is kind of what Fallout is. Like, although you're literally called the chosen one in Fallout 2, you're the chosen one who only is a celebrity in your crap little tribe. As soon as you go in the rest of the world, no one likes you, and a lot of people are pretty racist towards you because you're a native. Like, you don't mean shit in the world outside of your tribe. The fact that you're called the chosen one is almost like mockery of you, because you couldn't matter less. You matter because of your actions that you go out and do in the world. And you go.
Oh, sorry. Like, I apply this whenever I DM in D&D. Like,
Nice.
whenever the campaign ends, I always kind of go through the catalog, what players have done, and I'm like, which one really did something that affects the world? I'm not talking about like they killed a dragon, or like they killed X, or they solved X puzzle. I'm talking about things that actually affected people. For example, in my last campaign I did before I left from Perth to Melbourne, there was a moment where one of the characters was a wizard, and he was having a chat with some of these children in a village, and they asked him, doing it. I'm like, what's it like being a tiefling? And he tells them what being a tiefling is like, and it's like, oh, it's a very oppressive place in the Fire Plains and all this sort of stuff. And from that, I'm like, that's a really good thing that you did, thinking in my head. So at the end of the campaign, I told him how like you telling that story to those children allowed those children to grow up with a different mindset for tieflings. So whenever they met tieflings, they understood what it's like to be a tiefling. And then the other person on the side of the table went like, what about me? What about my accomplishments? I'm like, you just hit stuff. No, I didn't say that, but I said I tried to say, oh, you did this and that, but that was only because of the prompt. But seeing that sort of thing is something that a lot of players in tabletop or digital games need, that sort of feedback, I reckon.
Yeah, it's one of the most frustrating things is when you build a specific type of character in an RPG and nobody notices that. They're just like, hello, traveler. It's just like the most generic greeting, or they don't notice anything that you look very crazy, or you're a different type of, odd creature that shouldn't be here, or, you're a really notorious
Outer Worlds does that a little bit. Like, they do stuff like, if you're intelligent, people speak to you like, oh, you're a sharp one and stuff. But if you're dumb, they're like, the hell? Why did you say that?
Yeah, that was an old thing Fallout 2 did. And in fact, I think I think that New Vegas did it, Fallout 2 did it, because they're both Obsidian. I'm sure Outer Worlds, was that what it's called? The new one. I haven't played it yet, but I'm sure it does the same thing. If your intelligence is really low, people will catch on really quick that you are literally mentally handicapped. And some people will treat you quite nicely based on it. Other people, especially, I know this is specifically a thing in Fallout 2, to barter with people, if you have low enough intellect, you will literally hand them your purse, and when you barter, they will just take out as much as they're supposed to get. A lot of people will rip you off because they understand that you aren't going to be doing the math. They will steal from you. Whereas there are people that you can communicate better with because you are mentally handicapped. And I think it's a gag more than anything. But the tribal guy who sounds really dumb near the beginning of the game in the first like regular town you go to, if you have less than 3 intelligence and you talk to him, then you just talk in like a native language or something, and in parentheses you can see what translates to in English, and it's like comedically regal talk.
Yeah, I remember
and like and you can do like an elaborate quest line with him where it's like, how do you do, my good man?
But the thing is also with all these the complexity of like adding an intelligence factor to your dialogue, one thing that kind of blows me away is the extra amount of work narrative designers and writers have to factor in to incorporate that into the game. Like, they have
hard to sell.
Go through every single decision that you make and go, dumb decision, neutral, intelligent. And that's mind-boggling. That would be crazy to turn it right. But then again, they are doing it as a job. So
Yeah.
Yeah,
you would have the time.
it requires
Yeah.
an extreme amount of putting yourself into different shoes and writing out different responses and stuff. Yeah, I remember that. Another example I had from Fallout 2 actually is I made a character that was so dumb that he couldn't explain what he wanted to a mechanic, so I couldn't actually fix the car and not even
Yep.
get the car for the game, so I was kind of screwed to walk on foot for the rest of the game.
I really have to play Fallout 2 well.
It's so I beat it
every.
I replay it every year. It's so good.
Yeah,
And
Wow.
the restoration mod for it that adds all the cut content back in is so good.
yeah.
I'll put
Another
that on
game
my
that has a lot of that too, made by some of the same guys as Fallout. Arcanum has a really really deep system. They not only have intelligence, they have charisma, but they also have beauty as well, physical
Sorry,
attraction.
what was the name of that one?
Arcanum? It
yep.
was by Trinket Games. They have a lot of really really good dialogue options there. They also have the I think they call it the Idiot Savant or something like that. Where
I didn't know this was made by them. GOG tells me to get this like every hour of every day. I'm actually
No.
gonna get it now. You just sold me on it.
Yeah. I would say the combat it is probably its weak point, but if you have the patience to get through it,
I have the patience for everything. My favorite game is Deadly Premonition.
oh god, okay, yeah.
I did a 100% Let's Play of it on PC. Like
Yeah.
I can fix anything, man. I have the only Let's Play on the internet of KOTOR, or sorry, of not KOTOR. I was just playing KOTOR yesterday. Kanung Legend of the North, which is like a 1996 Russian Eurojank game.
Oh no.
And I think I'm the only guy to ever Let's Play it. It's the hardest to record game I've ever found in my life, and I found a way to do it because I can fix anything.
That's great. Yeah.
I don't know how to program, but I can fix anything.
Yeah. I mean, if you can get old games to run, you're basically qualified to be an IT professional at this point. So,
Hell yeah.
but the games that really kind of notice your character, I really appreciate.
Yeah.
Like for example, Arcanum has a really complex. It has a I don't remember the exact name, but it's a reaction modifier, which is based on what you're wearing, which race you are, how beautiful
Nice.
they are, what their charisma is, and everything like that. It's all done in the back, and so your current state, how well you're dressed, your race, your charisma, your beauty, and everything is calculated, and how well you speak. It affects reactions greatly. Like one character can have at least like 6 to 8 different reactions depending on your stats. So
That's
some
awesome.
random blacksmith in the first town, like pretty cool stuff if you really dig in deep. But games that really notice your character are pretty great. I don't have a good segue for that. But
To anyone watching who might be sold on the game based on his description, by the way, it's currently cheaper on goodoldgames.com than it is on Steam.
Usually
I'm buying
is.
it right now, but PayPal will not load. What the hell's going on? Come on.
Just to touch on that idea, I was listening to a podcast, Script Lock, where they talk to people who make narratives for games, and they were talking to one of the narrative designers for the Walking Dead games,
Yep.
and she was explaining that what they would do to anticipate player reactions is because this is obviously a less stat-driven kind of game. It's more based on your decisions, but they would anticipate the character reactions or the player reactions based on just dungeon mastering themselves and kind of playing a game and seeing what they wanted to do in a certain situation. And it seems like a brilliant solution to a very difficult problem in solving having the game react to what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, some games do it a lot more scriptedly, where they just have like a branching path, and it's just a bunch of lines connecting to other boxes and stuff like that. That's more of the Telltale way, where they just have this equals that, and it gives you those options. And as long as you think of almost every logical progression, that's great. And then other games have more of a systems-based calculation, where once you've reached a certain threshold, these new options open up and things like that. Now, I kind of tend to lean more towards systems rather than very specifically defined paths, because otherwise you have to really think through absolutely everything and create these complex paths. Otherwise, it's like, unless you specifically tell this person this one specific thing, you'll never get that option, which I always find kind of frustrating, because I think that there's many different ways to convince. There should be multiple ways to convince people. There should be like multiple avenues you can take to get in good with somebody. You shouldn't have this one specific option. But it's just a style of design and philosophy. But either way is great if it's done well enough. I like the Telltale style where so-and-so will remember that, and so later on when this, you have to have this particular requirement to be able to convince this guy or talk this guy down from something, and you weren't nice enough to him earlier. That's a cool system, but there's lots of different ways. I'm sure people will think of new ways to do it too.
Yeah.
There's some.
If you could segue into multifaceted diplomacy if you wish, but maybe you want to move on with something else.
Multifaceted diplomacy. That sounds really intelligent.
Segues are lame.
Well, I was gonna pull up another one of Soul Porpoise's ones because we've been talking over him this whole time. So.
Yeah, of course.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
So progress gates. So progress gates being used multiple times after we already have access at a certain point. Okay, so you're talking kind of like the Metroidvania style thing where there's a certain type of door or barrier that you can get through, but once you've attained that ability, they keep on recurring. Would you consider that a good thing or bad thing, or what was your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's driving me nuts. This is something that to criticize the Fallen Order, it does the same kind of thing, like where it will make you earn a certain skill, and then you'll get past a barrier, like when you go back to it, and then beyond that barrier, will have a chest locked by the same skill. It's like, why are you making me do this? It makes the whole thing perfunctory. It's something that's driving me nuts just because I've noticed that games are still doing it. It's not like a skill. Like I think if you do have a Metroidvania mechanic where it requires you to take a risk or use MP or something like that, then absolutely. But like, correct me if I'm wrong, and there are definitely more rabid Resident Evil fans than me. But once you get past a certain area with the heart key or whatever, or the diamond key, you don't have to access another door with the diamond key again, correct?
I mean, that'd be kind of a
I don't remember.
Okay. That's my understanding. That's best of my memory. If I'm wrong, please tell me.
I think you're right. Yeah. Sorry, it's okay. Yeah. I've only played like all of them.
I recently played the RE2 remake, and I don't remember ever needing a key at the same time.
I actually haven't played it yet.
Yeah,
you haven't played RE2 remake, and you call yourself a Resident Evil fan. Look,
my favorite Resident Evil
2 was announced. How dare you?
My favorite Resident Evil, I think the best one, kind of 2. The second one's kind of an expansion. Is Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak File 2 are amazing games. They were PlayStation 2 online games, so the servers aren't up anymore, but they emulate perfectly, and there are online servers still hosted by hardcore fans. You just get the Japanese version, get the English patch. It was released in English, but the Japanese version runs better, so that's what people use with an English patch. And it is the coolest game ever, and you can play it online with people. And I let's played both of them. I did multicam let's plays with my fancy editing.
Yeah, it's pretty obscure.
And you gotta play them. They're the last tank control ones they ever made before Resident Evil 4 came out. And I like 4 for its own thing.
Yeah.
I have a hard time calling it a Resident Evil game just because in Resident Evil you control and you're like scared of things. And in Resident Evil 4, the first thing I did was leap out of a 2-story building through a glass window, tuck and roll, and then roundhouse kick like a 200-pound man about 6 feet through the air. He rolled on his neck and got back up, and I kept shooting him. So I don't know if I'm gonna call it a Resident Evil game. The game's awesome as hell. I let's played that too, but Resident Evil, man, those games are awesome.
So you're saying, now that we're completely derailed this point with Resident Evil, you're saying that Resident Evil 6 with the jump kicky guy is your favorite of the series then? Yeah.
Now, I did let's play that as well, and let me tell you, when people talk about Chris's campaign being the worst thing in the world, boy howdy, they were right.
I can't decide whether
that game was horrible.
Chris's is just like a bad Gears of War campaign, but the other guy was arguably worse. The melee focused guy. Yeah, Jake's like jump.
Please, the coolest character, Jake.
He kicks a lot. He kicks zombies in the head. I actually I legitimately liked Leon's campaign in 6, but that was the only good thing about that whole game, I think.
5 was fun with a friend because anything is fun with a friend.
Yeah.
I let's played. I'm like the only guy I know who actually beat all of Ride to Hell Retribution twice because it lost my save file at one point because that game is awful. That was fun because I laughed at it with a friend. Anything can be fun with a friend. Chris's campaign was not that fun with a friend.
No.
That's next level bad. Like I can't think of much worse. That's pretty bad.
Yeah, that could go in a whole conversation, but yeah, RE6 is pretty much, universally agreed on is not great. But to get back to Soul Purpose's point about, yeah, I mean, like you were saying, I keep on thinking of some game. It was either like a Zelda or maybe it was Dark Souls or something like that. Or not, Darksiders. Or I think you get a gauntlet and you can like smash rocks or whatever. And
I see. Yeah,
some game like that had something like a smashing rock gauntlet or whatever, right? You smash a rock and you're like, okay, now I open up this new area, right? Then why do you have to smash 50 other rocks in that area? You've already done that. You've already passed that barrier.
Yeah.
Unless there's unless there's some sort of skill element, like I have to kill guys with a smashy rock thing or whatever, or there's some
do what Zelda does, and like you lose a bomb or something. Yeah, like there has to be risk associated with it. If you're just switching weapons and then destroying something, you don't have to make me do that again. It's okay. I'll pass.
Like if you had to equip the red key to open up a red door, and then behind that red door are 50 more red doors.
Right.
Key. It's like
I get what you're talking about. Yeah. Sole Purpose. I get that, and it reminds me, of course, like of God of War, how like you have like your Leviathan axe. And then when you get the Chaos Blades, you're like, you go back, and But going back through, and you're like, oh, that thing that was entangled before, I can chop that to bits. I think in those instances when you go, okay, like you're going through the game originally, and you notice things that's like, well, why can't I get that? It has to be a little bit less obvious, Like it can't just be like, like a rocky wall that looks like it has cracks in it. You're like, I could smash that later. I just have to find the artifact to do that first. I think when it has giveaways like that, and you get that item, and you go, okay, I can go back and smash that brick wall. I don't know. It's been what, like 20 years or so since that's been used. I think we can start to kind of evolve it a little bit. Maybe what I can add to that as well.
Yeah. God of War was one of my the games I had in mind. I just didn't want to say it, considering.
No worries.
GriffinMuffin's like sharpening his knife behind the scenes.
Yeah.
No, we've already had a discussion outside of this, and we were politely discussing hot take.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's if there's some sort of challenge, a risk, or puzzle element, I think it's okay. But if it's just literally just pushing a button that you've already pushed before and suppressing a gate that you've already surpassed, I mean, the whole point of having different instances of this gate is to block you off from like other areas, right? But once you've surpassed that one gate, you shouldn't have to do it again necessarily, unless there's some sort of challenge element, I think, because otherwise it's just redundant if it's just using that item again. I mean, what a lot of games do, I think Metroid kind of innovated this in some ways, is that they combine that item or that ability with a weapon, so it's not completely useless. You can use your red missiles or your green missiles in Super Metroid, and they're both differently effective at fighting as well as getting through doors. Then again, once you've gone through like one door, do you need to really go to the next? I've not played Super Metroid for a while, so I don't remember exactly like if you have to get through a green door and then another green door and then another green door. I think they're fairly logical in that you're not going to necessarily have to go through multiple layers of the same type of door. I think it's just getting to different pockets of behind that type of gate. But
I've played
through on the Switch now if you want it.
Oh yeah, it is actually.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I think actually also recently. The best thing to kind of make the Metroidvania style sort of game mechanic, like you require X, you can now smash Y, is to actually make it it's not really that much of a difference and not like groundbreaking, but Batman Arkham games did stuff where it's like, you got freeze grenades, you can throw the freeze grenade in the water and it makes a platform, or you can throw them at steam vents and it freezes them. Like to have different avenues of being like, I could do this or do that with this X weapon.
Yeah.
Kind of branches out a little bit more. It doesn't really, change it too much, but it makes it a little bit more interesting rather than just X weapon does Y in the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were saying something, Soul Porpoise. I think did you get cut off there?
Oh,
or-
I was just gonna say I've played through Metroid or Super Metroid pretty recently. So much so that I'm willing to say I'm pretty confident it doesn't give you the same colored doors after I've already passed that point.
Yeah, I
Okay.
think as far as I remember, it's just different pockets of that behind that gate in different areas of the world rather than just layers of the same gate.
Yeah,
I think that
exactly,
sounds
which
right.
is fine. Like,
Yeah.
I think it's great to make you kind of like take note of a certain door color or something like that, and then having to come back to it. But once you passed it, it's over. Stop it.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually like the idea of having more versatility where like you're kind of now thinking of different ways to use your ability. Like obviously back in the SNES, that was incredibly groundbreaking and very interesting and very kind of like cutting edge. But now that we've developed, decades of games since, maybe we could think about having different uses that you kind of figure out of that particular item. Like maybe you do like a reflection shot and hit something behind a wall or
Mm,
kind of mix it up a little bit. So
yeah.
you're not just doing, oh, this is obviously green, use the green thing on the green thing and get through the door. Like that's once you figure it out once, you kind of know it. But Super Metroid, I remember doing a lot of things and they combine things too. They use like for example, you may have the super bomb, but you may not have the scope yet, so you can't look through the floor and see that one spot that has a super bomb yet. So you're without knowing that there's that one square that can be destroyed by a super bomb, you wouldn't have used it there necessarily. So things like that, kind of layering abilities on top of other abilities. That's an interesting idea, and that was pretty groundbreaking for the time. But you don't really see too much of that now. It's pretty obvious. Usually has games usually have like a scrape or something, some sort of mark that's pretty obvious, or a color that
Yeah.
is color coded. So. All right, I've got plenty more here, so let's try to burn through some more points. Let's see. This one actually brought up with my friend today. Souls-like game mechanics. This isn't necessarily I guess you could say it's a little bit annoying in some cases where games just get compared to Dark Souls repeatedly, but essentially what people mean.
Who would do that?
Who would do that? But essentially what they mean though is like high skill, high difficulty games with some sort of consequences for dying or losing. Like I've even heard of some racing games taking on these mechanics. Like I think Need for Speed Rivals or whatever had things like that, where like you could rack up a certain modifier, a certain score or whatever, but if you get caught by the police, you lose all of that. You can pretty much apply it to any sort of game. It doesn't necessarily have to be a Souls-like game or a Souls-born game, but what are your guys' thoughts on that? Like, is it gone too far? Do you like how it's going? I mean, Star Wars is probably one of the most recent examples of that, where it kind of takes that elements.
Which is why, like, I'm desperate to leave it out of the conversation just because I don't want to get yelled at by the internet. But with that said, I do think like this is kind of going back to the original point that I was making with it, like. I think it was Jim Sterling who made the point that it should have been, rather than a Souls-like game, a Devil May Cry style game where you get these different abilities and you get to just kick ass and go crazy on it. I think the way that you described it with the high difficulty or high skill, high difficulty, I think it really lends itself to a game like Star Wars. I think Star Wars definitely loses it at a certain point. And just goes ham on a really stupid aspect of it. It didn't ruin the game for me, but I do think that like if that's the kind of game that you're going for, it definitely helps communicate the story if it's done right.
Yeah, it instantly creates an impressive world that you can't take lightly. Like it wouldn't. I wouldn't want a Mario Souls-like game where you're like every Koopa is like secretly stomps you and you die and you lose all your coins. And
Are you saying you're not curious? Because I'm curious. Look, if a Mario Souls game came out, I'd be really fucking curious. They made an XCOM game. I'm curious.
They did make a Mario XCOM game. They made Mario racing games. They made Mario all sorts of games.
Is anything off the table?
I apparently not, but I mean they basically like I'd argue that Zelda Breath of the Wild is kind of like light Souls like mechanics. They made
Really?
the combat. Yeah, if you play the game, it's got blocking, dodging, pretty beefy and pretty hard combat
Mm.
at times. Honestly, for a Zelda game, and it has a fairly broken armor system, but other than that, the actual core gameplay, you can definitely tell that they took some inspiration from I would say some from the Dark Souls genre in terms of the difficulty, not necessarily the consequences for losing, but definitely the skill and difficulty type combat. You can't just button mash. You have to dodge. You have to roll. You have to block. You have to reflect certain things at a very specific time, or you die instantly.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I like that it's. I mean, it's basically like I would actually say if you want to go back, really far back and just kind of say what it is. It's basic. Remember NES hard? Like you play the NES games, and it's like, oh, this game is
Yes.
NES hard. Like the Nintendo Entertainment System had some incredibly hard games, like Ninja
Yeah, I grew up with
Gaiden,
that.
Contra.
Journey to Silius.
Yeah, pretty
That
much
was
Oh,
good.
yeah.
almost every game.
You know, that's coming out on Switch in a few days.
Yes, it is
Ah,
actually.
some of the best soundtracks on the console. Damn
Yeah.
right. You know, that's originally going to be a Terminator game, which is why the boss is like the Terminator.
That's funny. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's almost it's kind of annoying to say like when people kind of say Dark Souls made games hard, and it's like games were hard.
Right.
They got a lot easier, and then they got hard again. But
Yeah.
I do like how that particular system where everything's not a pushover. You can actually be challenged. You can actually die pretty easily, and if you die, there's consequences. You'll lose something, or you have the risk of losing something. And it basically what it does is it just gets you invested in living and getting good and surviving, because a lot of games just kind of one scene blends into the next because you're generally winning. Occasionally you'll run into a hard part, but you can just restart. Dark Souls not so much.
Yeah.
If you die and they die again, you lose all your progress. You lose a lot of progress. So, uh, yeah, I think it was a net positive as long as it's not just overdone or done poorly. Like some games try to emulate Dark Souls so closely, but then one of the things that's a big problem with games like that, if you do the difficulty and the style of combat of Dark Souls, but you have bad animations, like one.
Are we talking?
Like,
Go ahead.
yeah, but what one factor of Dark Souls combat is being able to is the tells, like just to be able to see that movement. Oh, that guy's about to swing, or he's about to do his like spin attack. Just being able to that split second of, oh, he's going to do something that I now have to react to in a specific way. If you have bad animations that don't have enough of a tell, or have tells that are too similar, or whatever, your animations don't have enough of a time to properly react to them, that can be bad. Like I don't think that was it Lords of something or other that wasn't.
Lords of the Fallen.
Yeah, that one wasn't as good
Yeah.
for that. But things like Neo were pretty great. They did the Dark Souls formula pretty well. So
Hmm.
Lords of something or other. That's a winning title.
I mean, it's a very forgettable title to begin with. That's on them.
yeah. All right.
I'd buy it.
I'd buy it. Lords of something or other. Cool. Well, I've already done both of yours, Mah-Dry-Bread, and one of them was exactly the same
I
as
made
mine. So,
two.
yeah, one of them was exactly the same as mine. So,
Yeah, it was, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I just
A very
worded
subtle
it
call out.
funnier. I worded it funnier, and then you didn't read it word for word. So what was the point?
podcast room.
I'm a comedian. Why did you bring me on?
You've been telling me, he was like, hey, we're going to do this podcast. We do this podcast now? It's like, sure.
Yeah. I've been telling you that I want to do just anything together for like 2 years, and then you get me on for like serious talk. Of course, the chat's gonna be mad at me because I'm goofing on everything. I'm a comedian.
No, it's great. I'll grab one of Griffin's ideas then. Let's see. Realism traded for storytelling. Focusing on the hyper-realistic graphics and explosions, pew pew, and a high-grade mocap to tell a mediocre story. So you've got some beef with Mortal Kombat 11. I have
A little bit of beef.
I kind of gave up after 10. I did like 9 a lot, but I haven't played 11 yet. So what's your thought process behind that?
with Mortal Kombat 11, I felt that this. Yeah, okay, so the mocap is brilliant. It captures all the emotions, everything like that. It's so hyper realistic with how they move, and it's just beautiful to watch. But it's essentially Crisis on Infinite Earths, but in Mortal Kombat, and it kind of comes across as a little bit just there's some cool stuff to do with like what happens with the game, but it kind of feels like the story was made just so they could have a premise for the game. I'll be like, oh, we need characters from multiple timelines and like different outfits and stuff. So let's make a story where there's a Crisis of Infinite Earths so that can happen. You know, it very much felt like a story that was made for the convenience of actually selling the game itself. And there's been a few channels that have critiqued some of the story developments with some of the characters. A lot of like talking like 20 years of history for characters, and then just Mortal Kombat 11 is like, no, we're scrapping that because we need this character to be like this, so it could be more approachable and stuff like this. Like having that sort of I have beef with that for that reason, and but more to the hyper realistic thing, like. I think we've discussed this before on like Twitter and stuff, how like hyper realistic worlds can be traded for like having more grounded, more of refined stories rather than simple cookie cutter stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also, one aspect I think actually, uh, being too realistic graphically can actually be harmful if everything else isn't quite up to snuff. Like not to bash on our boy Kojima, but he tends to have pretty cutting edge looking games, but his scripts are fucking bonkers. The stuff he imagines is just absolutely insane. Like I watched a few hours of his latest game, which is probably going to win Game of the Year awards for if current trends are going on. But think of what the game of what you will. It has some pretty silly, crazy ideas in it, But the fact that
so my wife's really big into that game and stuff, and
Death Stranding.
Yeah. So I heard her watching the cinematics and stuff online, and occasionally I just hear this like murmur from the next room. What the fuck is going on?
And even in context, you're like, okay, this is a bit weird. Like it's got some weird stuff in that game, but because
I love that stuff.
It looks so real, like pretty real for a video game. Like they do some really good mocap, and they bring in real actors and some of the actors are actually directors and stuff like that, and so it looks uncomfortably real. It's also got a little bit of the uncanny valley in there too, just for good measure. But because it feels so real, you're now in like movie territory. So if you're using like Japanese anime level dialogue in like a Hollywood movie visual, way, it really emphasizes how cartoonish your dialogue is. Like if you had a bit more stylized graphics, it wouldn't seem so off. But there's a double-edged blade, so to speak, when you go to that realistic, and also it gets more expensive. A lot of things. But I think I kind of get what you mean, where and especially like the other point you brought up with Mortal Kombat is that a lot of stories are written backwards, where it's like, we need these two things. We need this thing to happen. We need Batman and Superman to fight. Cool. How do we write backwards from that to make that happen, rather than what would be a good story if these two characters existed in the same universe? What would probably happen? Like they're like at the end goal of where you have all these Mortal Kombat characters from all these different dimensions and timelines fighting together, and they're trying to just stitch together some excuse for that to happen, rather than what would be the logical conclusion for all of these characters or situations to be in the same universe. And we've seen some really interesting explorations of that. If you do it well, it's all about the execution. You can make anything work. Like famously, Jim Butcher, who wrote I don't know if you ever read my fiance reads a lot of the Jim Butcher stuff, but he wrote I totally forgot it, Dresden Files. Good series of books. But he famously did a conference and asked people to give him two crazy ideas just at random, two crazy ideas, and he'll merge it together and make a legitimate, taken seriously series out of it. And people gave him the two ideas they gave him was Pokemon and the Lost Roman Legion. Two things you'd like.
Okay.
How the hell will that work, right? He made a legitimate story. So it's the
I mean, Kingdom Hearts exists.
Sure. I hate Kingdom
that's a
Hearts
thing.
with a passion, but that's just me.
Wow.
There you go. That's a completely legitimate opinion. I'm fine with it, but I don't blame you. Also, I think chat might be mad at you for saying anime writing is bad.
No, I mean, anime fits within itself because it is cartoony. It is kind of heightened. It is fantasy. It is unrealistic. But if you took
Akira is written like crap.
Akira is
that movie.
Not to get off on a tangent, but Akira is a beautiful movie. My God. It looks great.
Completely beautiful. Let me show you.
Okay. Well, we lost a crew member.
Completely beautiful.
I thought it was interpretive dance time, but anyway.
Oh, the visual design. The visual design is beautiful.
Yeah.
It's the only good part.
We've lost our Akira fan base. Oh no.
No, it is the manga was apparently good. I don't know. I didn't read it, but even the manga writer said that the movie is a mess because it tried to condense so much into one movie that it is unintelligible. It skips such large parts of the plot. It can't make sense. It's just beautiful, and that's why people like it and why I got this awesome jacket. But like, it's terrible. So yeah, I back you up on anime writing.
So yeah, but like, imagine if you took an anime shot for shot, word for word, and did it in like Hollywood, with real actors. Like, it would seem
real
really
actors.
Out of place. Like live action.
Okay, I thought you meant like anime voice actors aren't real actors.
No. I actually respect voice actors more than I respect. In general, respect live action because you have to do so much more with just one.
I think I agree, actually.
But no.
And also,
no,
yeah.
No, sorry. Go ahead. What?
Oh no, go ahead. I was just gonna join with something, but you were in the.
No,
in the
I'm just on a long tangent. Sorry. I don't remember what my point was. Akira something bad. Akira bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
I did it. I derailed it again. Chocolate creme DB.
I don't know. Like, you take a scene from World of Warcraft. It's got kind of painterly, kind of stylized, somewhat cartoony video game graphics. It's fine. You put that into a really
beautiful.
dark. You take that exact scene, took it into like a dark, gritty, live action, photorealistic setting. You're like, there's something off here. It's like it tonally just doesn't really fit. So, photorealism has its good, especially if you're trying to tell a very realistic, down to earth story. Photorealism can only help, but if you are kind of heightened reality, if you aren't really just like grounded, I think that having more stylized graphics can actually be a bonus.
Yeah, you have to make sure the form matches the tone.
Yeah. Cool. So now that we know that Kira's bad, and
that's all you need to know.
Let's see if I've got any other topics here.
I should have put all the Mass Effect jacket when you said Mass Effect's ending was bad.
I actually have a Kira like hoodie, I think somewhere around here, but I'm not gonna pull it out.
Oh, that's awesome. I got the English patch on the back and everything.
English. I'm gonna bring up something not controversial at all and talk about PC platform wars.
Okay.
So Epic Games, Epic Games exclusivity. Origin is apparently teaming up with Steam again. They're like making those games kind of cross-compatible somehow.
Cool.
Bethesda games have actually they went off and did their own thing for like a year, and now they're kind of like bringing their games back to Steam. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
They realized it wasn't profitable because their platforms suck. I've had my Ubisoft account hacked like twice by Russians who then unlocked a bunch of stuff in video games for me. And then I got my account back. And when I got my account back, they didn't ask me for any proof that I owned the account. They just gave it to me, which tells you how bad the security is on Ubisoft. All these other platforms are really horrifically bad. I have this really fun problem with the Epic Games Store where randomly, 1 out of, I'd say, 3 times that I close a game on Epic, the Epic game store then tries to open, and it'll rapidly open and close and create a strobing effect until I go into my task manager and end the process for it. And it is blinding. It could probably kill an epileptic. So that's that platform. That platform tries to kill you. Ubisoft gets hacked always. I had so many viewers tell me that their Origin account has been hacked to the point that they can't even get it back anymore, and the Origin support does not respond to them anymore, including my best friend had that happen to him. Every one of these platforms are so bad, except for Steam and GOG, that of course they're coming back to Steam. They're not selling anything on their garbage platform. What is Rockstar doing selling their, what was it, Red Dead Redemption 2? Everybody wants it on PC.
Yeah.
And then they tried to sell it on Rockstar Games. No, it's on Steam already because no one bought it on Rockstar. God.
Yeah, at least they had like a month of exclusivity for RDR2, which I'm like, okay, kind of sucks, but at least they know that people are gonna, some people are gonna buy immediately on their platform, and some people are gonna wait a month. I'm not so bummed about a month delay before it gets on Steam, but like a year
Month
delay.
is fine.
A year delay
Yeah,
is a bit
insane.
much. Like we've been
Years.
seeing a lot of games.
Look at the chat.
Yes.
Multiple people in the chat have had multiple different accounts hacked of the
Oh,
platforms
no.
I just talked about. A chat of less than 100 people, and people in here have had that problem. It's that common.
Yeah,
We
that's
have
wild.
EA, yeah, we have Origin in there. Multiple stories of Origin accounts getting hacked. It's unbelievable. It's all the time.
Yeah, that's too bad
Yeah.
because oh, sorry, you're gonna say something, Griffin?
No, I was just gonna say, like, I don't use the, like, that's probably because like the scope of the games that I play usually don't branch out to EA. They often Ubisoft. I think I played Far Cry 3 on there for a few hours, but that was like the only time I used the Ubisoft one. Bethesda
A
one,
few
I'm like,
hours was the right decision.
and then like with the Bethesda one, I went on there. I think it's also with a lot of these launches, they try and like they can go, oh, look at these other products that we have. See, it's right here in this convenient corner for you to click on.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, I'm only here for this game that I bought on Steam that makes me go to this launcher. You know, it's not a good sort of platform to be like, sell more stuff. How about trying different avenues of marketing?
Yeah, I mean, we're kind of. It's interesting how you see developing markets and developing technologies kind of make the same mistakes that older markets and older commercial avenues did. Like, you know, you saw it used to be that every store was its own little thing. You'd have a belt buckle store. You'd have like a horseshoe store. You'd have a this store and that. And then eventually people figured out like, how about we have a general store? How about we have a department store where we carry
Yep.
everything? You know, so you could get everything you need and pay once. You know, and it's really convenient. You just go to that store for everything you need. And that's why Walmart is took over the world. You know, because everybody likes having everything relatively decently priced. They don't have to travel across town 50 times to get everything they need at a decent rate and availability. But the problem then becomes like with Steam, that was this kind of the one-stop shop for, you know, digital online goods. It wasn't perfect at the beginning. It took many years to get to be as good as what it is now. But once people saw the money there, they're like, okay, we're going to pull our goods from Steam and make our own store. And then, you know, it happened with Uplay, it happened with Origin, with Bethesda and Epic Games. They didn't really have their games on Steam, so it wasn't as big of a deal. I mean, they had a couple of their, I don't know, tournament games and stuff like that, but their new games were kind of built onto Epic's, and that's fine. You know, if you want to play Fortnite on Epic Games, I understand that. But then the kind of forced exclusivity, you know, agreements where, you know, I can understand, you know, I 100%, I'm working on pitching a game right now. I can definitely understand how difficult it is to get initial funding, and I see where they're coming from, but at the same time, it's like you're making your product literally less attractive and literally less easy to get on a less attractive platform with less perks and reliability. You know, like there was that time, I think, wasn't it that crazy Fortnite live stream where Epic was just down for like an hour or a few hours or something like that, so you couldn't even play your games. You know, things like that. It really doesn't bring a lot of it doesn't give you a lot of confidence in your store, your platform, or your business. So it definitely, we're seeing the same thing. Not to get off on a tangent again, but because we've been really on topic so far with this podcast. The same. We're seeing the same thing with movie and video streaming platforms. When Netflix proved it was viable, now everybody's creating their own streaming platform. You've got Disney Plus, you've got HBO, you've got like 2 or 3 different ones for Warner Brothers. You've got CBS All Access. You've got Hulu. You've got Starbucks has originals or whatever. Facebook has originals. Apple has originals.
Wait, Starbucks?
At least one, yeah.
What?
What?
Wow.
It's a coffee company.
I know, right? But it's gone crazy. Like once you prove that it's viable, everybody goes crazy and creates their own thing. I think it was like one show. I don't know if it actually became a thing, but it was called a Starbucks original. But
the fuck?
yeah, Facebook Watch is a thing now. So yeah, we've gone back to full circle where things are more inconvenient now than they were before. So I think it's anti-consumer. I like competition, and if Steam definitely had its blind spots in terms of customer refunds and stuff like that. Those have been mostly fixed, I think. But yeah, like I think that if you're going to compete on a fair ground. Like have 4 different platforms, and your privacy policies, your refund policies, your pricing schemes, and your reliability will determine who will get more business.
I agree completely.
If everyone gets the same games, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Someone pointed out in the comments how people also use launchers so they can collect collect data relevant to the game and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to pronounce that username because I think it might be a German channel, and I do not speak the language. But congratulations on them and getting verified. Good on you.
Yeah.
They're gave me a mat. Yeah, they're a German channel. They watch a lot of the live streams and things like that. They're pretty cool guys.
Oh, Indigo, you almost meet the requirements for verification. When you hit 100,000, let me know and I'll link you the page.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, hopefully by the end of the year.
Not everybody knows about it. It's weird, but you actually need to go ask.
Yeah, you need to ask. Hopefully by the end of the year, if I'm currently coasting on my last video, if I can maybe pass 100 by the end of the year, we'll see.
Yeah, you'll get there soon. I'm sure that one will carry you past because that video is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Even if it doesn't.
You're welcome.
Akira.
Yeah, what the hell is that all about? Jesus, get this filth off of me, Jesus.
I'm sorry for derailing us again.
This horribly written, beautiful filth off of me. Cool. Let's see. All right. Griff, should we do metagaming or multifaceted diplomacy?
Multifaceted is rather quick, but some others may have some things. But pretty much the approach is that in RPGs, you don't have persuasion or diplomacy to be the one thing that determines if you can unlock options in dialogue. It's the idea that you can, like we were talking about before, intelligent. If you're intelligent, it opens new dialogue avenues to solve problems in dialogue. Or, for example, like in Pillars, which is where I kind of started thinking about this a bit more, is you could do stuff like, if you have a high history skill, you can have, I know this problem because in history this was done before, and the person's like, that makes sense, and you resolve that issue. You resolve that issue from like not just strict diplomatic skills. There's stuff like there's very other fringe ones like streetwise. For example, like I remember early in Pillars 2, there's a situation where you can get into this gang fight, but if you have high streetwise, which is also used for like finding objects and stuff like that, you can go, we should probably break up this fight now because the guards are coming. It's kind of like a lie, but it's also just, the city, so you can go, no, we can't hang around in a group for too long, otherwise people will suspect things. It's that sort of stuff that should be incorporated into more RPGs, because sometimes the persuasion diplomacy skill in RPGs can kind of just be, I'll just become a diplomancer and just completely own the entire game,
Diplomancer.
Yeah.
I like that term. Yeah. I love games with multiple, like you said, different ways of convincing. Like one example that I always go to is Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, that had like seduction, persuasion, and intimidation. So it had 3 different avenues for you to take. So, like being able to, get at somebody's neck to drain their blood in a dance club, for example, that'd be a seduction thing. you know, getting a guard to back down and let you in might be an intimidation or whatever. Bribing somebody might be a persuasion. So there's like different avenues, and how you built your character would affect that greatly. If you're very beautiful, if you're very attractive, you could be more seductive. But if you're very strong and kind of brutish, you'd be more intimidating and things like that.
Yeah.
But you can go so many different ways. Like I even started tinkering with a stat system which every one of like 7 or 8 stats would have some sort of dialogue option unlock. Like if you were more dexterous or stealthy, you'd be able to lie better. You know, if you were more had more wisdom or intelligence, you'd have more history and knowledge and lore, so you'll explain or interpret things better that way. If you were more let's say strong, you'd be more intimidating. So like it's like almost every single stat could actually be a sort of influential to dialogue. You know, not every single dialogue option, but you'd have more dialogue options pop up depending on how you build your character. And I think that kind of makes it more interesting, because otherwise it's just like, one option for any situation. It's not necessarily true, because some people are very convincing liars. Some people are extremely good at selling. Some people are extremely good at avoiding, or using tact to avoid people's nerves, things like that,
Exactly. And also for stuff like, well, I like how you point out the seduction thing, because that's so Vampire Masquerade Bloodlines is such a big thing for that, because if you play the game as a female or a male, you get really different sort of like character journeys, Like I remember I've played the game a bunch of times, but like you're always in a male toreador and you have issues around that. But if you walk in as a female, like anything, and you walk up to the bartender, you're like, oh, hey, I want to go see somebody. Like, yeah, go on up.
Yeah.
It like completely changes the gameplay because of that. And it also says a lot about the world as a result. So it's perfect.
It's almost like you're playing a role, and your role determines how the world responds to you, or something like that. Like in a club, it's no secret, but clubs quite often let attractive women in for free, because it attracts more men, guys who pay for money, pay for drinks and things like that. So it's
pay for money.
Pay for money, exactly. But yeah, it is interesting. Again, that kind of goes back to one of our previous points. It's just the world responding to you in different ways based on your character. And
exactly.
We're seeing more of that. We're seeing kind of a resurgence of that kind of. They used to be kind of reserved for old school games, whereas more so than not, newer RPGs kind of make you play a predefined character more so. Like you play the Dragonborn, or you play, Commander Shepard, who's got his whole backstory and everything. You may have a variation of that character, but it's basically the same character for everybody. It's easier to write around a predefined character that almost every player plays, rather than you having a potentially very, very different character from what they expect you to. So it's a writing hit, crutch, and it lets, especially for dialogue, it lets you get off a lot easier, because you're able to write, a quarter of the dialogue, and especially voice a quarter of the dialogue, rather than having to write all these different, ancillary answers. But
yeah, and I think also, speaking of multifaceted diplomacy, I think one thing that needs to come across is you need required skill levels. It can't be percentages. You need an absolute skill level, because I don't know if for you, but when I played Fallout 3 and I had dialogue like speech thing, I just like, before I entered the dialogue, quick save and just do it over and over and over and over until I got the chance. But with a defined skill level, like you're like, oh, I don't have this thing. And you kind of prompted to go, how do I increase that? Or how do I find an item that can boost it for this particular dialogue instance and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's always a tricky thing. Avoiding save scumming is always tricky. Like, you either do just the guaranteed win or lose, or you can have it roll a chance every time, but that just, like, there was one time where I had a 5% chance. I just saved it and re-rolled it until I got the 5% chance. Took me 20, 30 times, but it eventually worked. But
welcome to Pokemon challenges.
Oh god, yeah. But
True. I didn't think of that.
There's a 5% chance that I can win this encounter. Well, it's better than grinding for 2 days, and I have a soft time limit. So I guess this is my next 100 attempts. I just beat the Elite Four earlier today using only the move Metronome, the move that picks random moves from the whole move pool of the game.
She could get.
I won.
Really get splash. But, yeah.
I've been doing it for 2 days, 2 straight days of the Elite Four.
Oh,
and I
God.
did it earlier today.
You've got a lot of patience.
I am the
Yeah.
most patient man in the world.
But it's funny as well how like that should be coming up more often, this multifaceted diplomacy thing, because in Greedfall, it steps back and it does the whole percentage thing again. And again, I just found myself stopping it, reloading, stopping it, reloading. And it's funny because Greedfall came out 2019, and but a lot of games are still kind of coming up to that point of defined skill levels and stuff.
Yeah, it's a
What is this game?
It's a spiders game. They've made a lot of RPGs. Not all of them great, but they try to they really uncharitably, you can call them a poor man's BioWare, but they've recently been kind of surpassing BioWare in some ways. So Greedfall was
In some ways,
received by a lot of people as being pretty good. So
This
I
one
was to-
reminds me of that game Vampire, where I heard it existed, and then people stopped talking about it 3 days later.
yeah, it kind of had one of those like hyped releases, and then like just silence after.
Was Vampire good? I played like an hour.
I bought it.
I don't know personally.
I bought it. I need to play it. I've heard it has some cool ideas. You can kind of like ruin some people's lives, and they'll stay ruined and stuff like that. In that, it's got like a small ecosystem in a small town, basically. Some kind of cool ideas like that. But
Okay,
I need to play.
I can definitively tell you that the cool ideas are not within the first hour.
Cool. Do you have any thoughts on that, Soul Porpoise?
Yeah, not really. I do think that if you do take advantage, like in defense of having a random outcome to like a conversation, I do think if you do like keep on reloading the save until you get what you want to get, I think there's a certain amount of like you reap what you sow in that. Like to not roleplay, to actively try to scam the game out of what like it's intending to do.
It depends on what's the result. What's like
If
it's like
that's exactly
the
it.
one
Like if the
thing
stakes are
before you
high
have a
enough,
fight. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Like you're not going to obviously not want to do it, be tempted to do it. I'm guilty myself, but I do think like there is some like element of that, just letting the game do what it wants to do. And kind of
I did that in Pillars. Like there were some things that are unavailable to me because like I was in that relevant skill, but I was like 2 notches off. I'm like, oh damn, but I wouldn't like leave and then try and do it again. I'm like, well, I'm in this situation. Let's just try and find another way around it. And the quest wouldn't turn out the way I want it to, but it would be this kind of journey of like, okay, that means next level, I need to put some more points in that just in case I get something like that again. And that's the attitude you can have to a set skill level. And when I say the speech level thing, like percentages, I always think about Fallout 3 because I remember like there'd be times when like a bandit will stop you, be like, hand over your money. And I'm like, speech, 67%. And I'm like, well, gonna have this.
Yeah.
A quick addendum to what I said before, because I worded something poorly. When I was asking if Vampire was any good and said I only played the first hour, I was talking about the new game called Vampire, like Vampyr. Some people thought that I was talking about Vampire the Masquerade, which I have played a few hours of in high school, and then I got scared by a haunted house and bitched out.
That's a good scene.
I do need to play it again. I'm better about horror games now. I'd probably have a lot of fun with it nowadays.
Yeah. Something I was going to say about all that, and I totally got my mentally derailed by vampires, but it's all good.
Vampires usually derail things. It's okay.
Yeah.
What were we talking about? There's actually one way. It's not really been done very often, but you know how you have like a random roll whenever you do one of those skill check options with some games, like Fallout 3 versus Fallout New Vegas, which has more of a static requirement. There is a way to do it. It's a little bit complicated, but instead of rolling as you click the option, you essentially have a random seed generated at the beginning of the game that does essentially all of your rolls predeterminedly. So you do have that chance that you might be able to do a dialogue option that might be a little bit above your grade. But if you fail, it's always going to be the failure based on your current stat. So you can't save scum. You have that level of
interesting.
Like randomity, so you never quite know if you're good enough. But if you fail, you know that okay, well I can't save scum it because that's basically my destiny. Like at my current skill level, I cannot exceed that role that's already been done. Basically, it's a bit complicated, but a programmer explained it to me, and it is possible. So I'm actually exploring.
Sounds pretty
There's,
interesting.
in fact,
Yeah.
the DS Pokemon games of all things have a system like that,
Okay.
where they understood that emulation was very popular by then, and so I don't know why they would do this, because it literally only affects emulators, and it doesn't stop piracy in literally any way. But in all of the Pokemon games leading up until the 4th generation, when it went to DS, if you hypothetically use an emulator to save during a battle, and let's say your attack has 75 accuracy and you missed, you could load and do it over and over until you hit, or do it over and over until you critically hit, which is a 1 in 24 chance. In the DS games, however, if you were to save during a battle and you pick Tackle, your outcome on that turn for every one of your 4 moves and whatever they're about to do to you is hard set into the game. It already knows whether that move would miss or not, whether it would crit or not.
Wow.
And so it literally, all it does is keep you from save scumming, specifically only an emulator, because on console, or on DS in that case, you wouldn't be able to save during a battle to attempt a save scum.
Right.
It literally only affects emulator. It's the only way where it could possibly affect it, because if you were to like reload to your last in-game save to before the battle, obviously everything is re-randomized, because that's how Pokemon works. And so it has a system like that, and it actually works very well. It's just so strange that that is literally only implemented for emulators.
Yeah, almost think that may have been an accidental effect, unless they really planned that loading and saving states would necessarily break the game. But yeah, if you took a system like that and made it so that there is that there's that unknown factor, because I like the idea that I don't have a good chance of doing this, but maybe I'll pull something out of my hat and pull off a great speech and convince the guy, even though I'm not good at that. It's not
because
like
that's a decision you make on that, taking that risk. That's risk. There's a word that I'm forgetting. Risk management, which is a big part of XCOM and stuff.
Right.
Is you're trying to play the odds. It's a gambling thing.
Someone mentioned XCOM in the chat as well, talking about how they do something very similar to what Indigo's been talking about. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. XCOM's been one of those games I've been meaning to check out, but time. So
I do recommend it for whatever that's worth. XCOM 2 is fantastic. XCOM 1 is great in its own way, but XCOM 2 is very, very good.
Yeah. Another way you could do it, and I've actually discussed this with a game designer as well, or the idea of actually slightly penalizing save scummers every time you load your save game, something is lost. That would be kind of interesting. Like there would actually be a counter attached to your save game every time you loaded it. There'd be something bad.
Undertale.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, Undertale did something like that. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I actually would almost like to have an RPG where you can't renege on your on your decisions. Like once you've done them, you've done them.
Yeah.
But
that's why I like Iron Man saves.
Yeah, but that also has its. Sometimes you just kind of get screwed. Like I heard that somebody, Let's Player actually was Iron Manning, I think Witcher 2 or whatever, and something glitched and they died during a cutscene. Oh no.
Yep. Stuff like that happens. I mean, so... I play. I have a save file of Crusader Kings 2 that's been going for just like a couple weeks over a year on an Iron Man save. We've had multiple glitches that were quite bad, and I managed to pull through on almost all of them. But sometimes you can just get fucked. And if you didn't have saves, if this were not an Iron Man save, you would have been able to go back, and that's a legitimate reason to go back, because the game, something bugged out. I think that's the most legitimate reason I can think of to save scum.
Definitely.
And that's a shame, because XCOM has Iron Man saves, for instance, as an optional thing you can do.
Right.
But there's always that little worry of, it's a whole lot of fun, but there's that little worry of, what if something glitches out? What do I do? Like, that's a lot of time you just wasted.
Sure.
Yeah, I think this discussion's going somewhere interesting, because it's talking about now like difficulty and stuff like that. There's Iron Man challenges in Stellaris, and I actually just started my first one a couple of days ago.
Oh, it's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and one thing it does, it says, you can now do achievements. And I'm like, you can do achievement with Iron Man mode. Like, that feels like really rewarding to do. And partly because like I log into the Steam thing, and my mate who also plays it, he's got like 16 achievements. I'm like, well then,
Yeah, it's a challenge, right? Like that's what I do in Paradox games as well. Is I want to be the guy on my friends list with the most achievements. I have like 700 friends because I let my fans add me. But like I want to. It's a fun thing for me. I'm not a big achievement hunter, but if it's a game I'm really passionate about, I want to try and get all of them. So like Hearts of Iron 4, I've got almost all of them. Stellaris, I'm working on it. There's a lot. Europa Universalis 4, that shit's not happening. There's like a billion.
Yeah. That actually dovetails another thing, but I was going to ask real quick. Sole Purpose, how is your time? Are you have a hard
Yeah. I was going to
pretty soon, right?
Yeah, I can go like another 15 minutes, but yeah,
okay.
I'm close.
Fair enough.
To the end.
Cool. All right, let's go on for a little while longer. Then we'll figure out if you guys are still up. We could probably continue with just 3, but it may destroy the template. I'll have to figure that. Cross that bridge when we get to it.
I can talk forever.
Got the day off. I'm good.
Cool.
Oh,
right. What were we just talking about? We're talking about something that's similar to one of the points I had.
Who knows?
Oh yeah, we were talking about achievements. It's one kind of thing. It's not necessarily new. It kind of came. I'd say it probably got into popularity around the time the Xbox 360 launched. Collectibles, just like a ridiculous amount of collectibles, and like achievement culture, where it's like, I'm going to platinum this game. You know, like I've talked to several people in real life that have actually platinumed the Spider-Man game for PS4. I guess that one's fairly easy to platinum because I've never got even close to platinuming a game myself. How do you think, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I'm kind of mixed on it. Like, I think it's cool that they have a meta game inside of a game, or just doing all the major actions you can do in a game, collecting all the things in the game. But at the same time, I can kind of see how a lot of time is being spent on games to design them to just have a lot of just random activities to do to appease that kind of demographic. Do you think it's hurting design, or do you think it's harmless?
It can. Look at Ubisoft games. I think they're particularly bad about things for the sake of having more things there. I actually quite like old school collectathons. Banjo Kazooie is one of my favorite games. I actually really liked DK64, even though I'm the only one. Other than the scare brace, I think unanimously as a race we can all agree that the scare brace was a mistake. But I actually quite like those games, and yet when I play like Assassin's Creed and stuff like that, it really does feel like a lot of these things are put in just for the sake of having more things. Whereas when there's an incentive to do really wacky things and collect a lot of things, or do things you wouldn't normally do in a fun way, I think that actually adds to the experience quite a bit. A great example of that is Hearts of Iron 4's achievements are often very creative and get you to play different countries you wouldn't normally play in ways that you wouldn't normally play them, and you get such vastly different experiences out of that I feel like it really adds something. There's an example of they put in a ton of stuff that isn't necessarily new things core to the game that really add a lot of value to a lot of players. And then there's Assassin's Creed.
Yeah. And it's also how the collectibles or whatever are implemented in a certain way. I like it when collectibles are added and they actually have a bit of a story element. Like off the bat, I can say the Batman Arkham games, the Riddler trophies, because they unlock like another bit of story for you to do. Some people find it a bit annoying, but personally, that was the drive to find these collectibles. Was like, oh, I'm going to interact with the Riddler. You know, that was the drive. But definitely in Ubisoft games, there's like collect feathers because he once had a bird and there's feathers everywhere. Like, what?
Maybe you'll get a costume, or you'll get a weapon that you already beat the game by this point, but here's a weapon.
Yeah.
I remember in number 2, it's like if you collect all the feathers, you get like a fancy shoulder cape, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
And I'm like, good, I guess.
Are you telling me that you don't want the bragging rights of having the most Ubi points on Ubisoft on your Uplay account? For years, back in the days when people used Skype, for years, my description, like the mood description thing on Skype, was no one uses Uplay willingly.
Yeah. And also with like the achievement stuff, some people have brought up stuff like with the 360 achievements, there was a gamer score. So that was a bit of a thing because you were literally ranked between people. And also someone's pointed out how achievements should be about challenges. Like someone mentioned Dishonored. I haven't played Dishonored, but I'm gonna imagine there's like kill a person a certain way, stuff like that, you know.
Yeah,
Which would be good incentives for achievements.
Yeah, and it, as far as I know, achievements they've kind of been ported to almost everything now. I think Ubisoft probably has them. Steam definitely has like player level and stuff like that. But the achievements themselves, they're given a number of points, I think. But it's up to the developer to design them. And some developers were notoriously lazy about designing their achievements. So there were literally games that got ironic popularity due to how easy it was to 100% them. Like
yep, they were cheap and it was easy to 100%. It's similar to the market on Steam of people who put out really, really, really bad, dirt cheap Unity asset flips, but the achievements, the pictures for the achievements are popular. For instance, one you'll often see is like there'll be a game for like 99 cents American, and you'll buy it, and like there's something super easy you can do right at the start, like look at the credits, and it'll give you every letter of the alphabet as achievements, and then what you do is you go in your showcase mode on your Steam profile and you could like spell your name or something.
So
and that's their business model, and is the most, do you even call that meta game? Because Steam as a platform isn't a game. It's the most meta. It's the most meta Steam business model I've ever heard of. It's kind of beautiful in its own way, but it's completely stupid.
Yeah, Corrupted Save in chat brought up a game that I was actually thinking about, which was this one Last Airbender game that nobody remembers for the Xbox 360, where you basically, the game is really short, and if you just complete the game, you get 100%. You can't not get 100% because they just broke up. The achievements are literally just chapters: chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, etc. And if you complete all the chapters, you get all the achievements. So it was a insanely quick way to get 1,000 gamer score within like a couple hours. So.
I've heard about these sort of ones. Yeah. There's another Xbox game that did that, and I remember online it's like, oh, if you want to bump your score, play this game and stuff. I'm like, but
so strange. It's like it's like not at all what video games are about, and yet that's a thing people are into. Like it's so strange to me, but it's absolutely fascinating that there's people who will spend money on games, and the entertainment that they're looking for is the bragging rights of having a higher score than their friends, regardless of the video game itself. It's like there's this own game on the side of having the best score. That is fascinating.
It'd be like going out and buying exotic sodas and tossing the bottle and keeping the cap or something like that. It'd be like, okay, I guess that's something, but I think I cut you off, Soul. Were you going to say something?
I don't remember it now.
I'm sorry.
No, you're fine.
Rambling.
No, it's okay. I probably derailed it.
Yeah, no, it's not the biggest problem. I just noticed that more and more, and less am I interested. Like, you know, even the first couple Assassin's Creed games, I'm like, I'm gonna complete every single side mission or whatever. Never care about the flags and stuff. It's like flags, whatever. But as the time goes on, I'm noticing there's just tons and tons of filler content. And I can really think that it's there for the achievement hunters, you know, the kind of the platinum gamers where they just want to get 100% on everything, and there's definitely an audience for that, just like there's an audience for, you know, I forgot the word is for playing a game fast, whatever it is, speedrunning, yeah. You know, you can implement this in your game, but at what point does it actually, you know, perhaps more interesting content rather than just filler content that you can use to pad out 100%, you know? Maybe that's I mean, it's up to the designers and the players to work that out, I guess, but I'm noticing that as a more and more of a thing where people want to, you know, get a specific arbitrary goal of completing X number of content rather than actually enjoying the game.
When it comes to the oddity of speedrunning getting popular and how, you know, should a game cater to that? How can a game cater to that? You know, stuff like that. Generally all speedrunners want is a really robust in-game timer, because most games, their in-game timer is so far off that no one uses it, and people use real-life time, which is a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Like, I speedrun Silent Hill 2 on PC, which is a beautiful game because I believe, from what we know from the development of it, The PC port was developed in 2 weeks, so they had no QI time. And so every glitch that I do to skip something in the game is based around a PC exclusive mechanic because every single one has a major bug related to it. And for whatever reason, Silent Hill games have immaculate in-game timers. They do not count cutscenes. They do not count menus, other than like one menu. They're just immaculate. Like, so we use in-game time. You can hook up a program to detect the in-game time so you can have a timer that's accurate. That's like all speedrunners ask for when it comes to that stuff, because anything beyond that, you're probably going to mess something up for the casual player, which is like the 99% of your player base.
Yeah, speedrunning is a complete fluke. I've heard
Yeah.
some people
It's beautiful, but it's so niche. It's so fucking niche.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah, I actually heard somebody argue about how a game in the 90s was designed a certain way for speedrunners, and I'm like, were you alive in the 90s? Do you remember what gaming in the 90s was
it's
like?
not it's not completely impossible. The word speedrunning wouldn't really be a thing, but there were people who competed over time-based scores since the Atari days, since the arcade days. You just wouldn't call that speedrunning. It's an evolution of competing for score in arcade games. That's what speedrunning mostly comes from. But you know, like, if you look especially at the history of 007 GoldenEye on the N64, people were posting their scores online of their times and trying to post proof and making moderation of that literally the month the game came out. And you can watch videos of it to this day. Like, GoldenEye is kind of a special case of they got on the speedrunning thing incredibly early and started showing video of it and everything. There's actually like a channel where you can go back and watch the history of it, including like the old black and white, like recorded it in PAL on an NTSC console, glitched out footage, and you're like, and you watch a run and you're like, wow, I can't even read the end score. And they're like, and we accepted that back then. Wow. But there's actually a speedrunning community for it. Yeah. So it's older than people think, but it's also been dodgy as hell for a long time. But yes, some developers actually intended things to be speed runnable. They just wouldn't call it that. They would have thought of it as, we want people to be able to compete over how fast they beat each level. Like Doom. That's why Doom had the replay system that was way ahead of its time. Doom 1 had a system where you can save a replay of any given level, where it's actually saving all of your buttons that you input in like a 2 kilobyte file that you can then send to anyone, and they can play the replay, and all it's doing is clicking all the same buttons they clicked. And that way you could send essentially flawless video to people through Doom 1 online through message boards back in the day to compare files, and they were really hard to doctor, to the point that to this day Doom 1 uses the same system. You don't use video, you use the in-game replay, which is just buttons. Wow. And you can actually read the button inputs, so you can read if they used a bot to hack it, because you can see inhuman inputs.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Human would be a bit more like, wouldn't be exactly like on the millisecond or whatever. It would be more. Yeah,
you would catch things where because you'd be able to go back into the file and then continue from there to try and perfect sequences or input things there. You would notice weird little oddities, like they'd be moving this way, and then for literally 1 millisecond they release, are doing a different thing, and then go back to it. That your hands cannot move that fast, and you could catch someone writing a script to do it through that. So even back in the days of Doom 1, they had the idea of, let's make it easy to share what your time is legitimately, so that players will come back to the game to compete in who can get the best time. So speedrunning has always been around. It's called speedrunning now.
Yeah, I can see that. I don't think it was really necessarily. I think this was about an RPG, so I doubt they were designing the RPG around speedrunning, but you know,
rarely, but
perfectly on point.
Rarely, but there are cases.
Yeah, sure. All right. Let's see. You wait a couple more minutes, or do you have to go, Soul?
Yeah, I should head out. But thanks for having me on. Thanks, chat. Thanks, guys. Have fun.
Good to have you on, Soul.
Yeah, you too. All right, I'll see you.
Thanks for coming on, man. I'll see you later. All right. This is my beautiful thing is broken. Okay, so let's.
Oh, I gotta see this.
We can repair this. Hang on 1 second.
I don't believe you.
All right.
So... You can repair this. Do you remember how long the beginning of the stream took? Oh no! Oh, I'm in between two things. I'm part Griffin, part Mah-Dry-Bread, and oh no.
Yep. All right, let's see if we can do this. Oh no.
Meanwhile, it's I'll just have a look at the chat and see if we have
Oh,
anything.
someone in the chat like an hour ago was bringing up Temple of Elemental Evil, and I immediately went and re-downloaded the game on GOG because I haven't played that in forever, and that game is sweet.
Oh man, it is. It's really good. I think
Yeah.
it was even Indigo that did a video on it, and he discussed how.
Did he? I gotta watch
I'm
it.
pretty sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
Did
did
you?
a video on there way back in the day. Yeah.
Oh, I'm gonna go watch it. Like not
'Cause
right
it's like
now,
the-
but
it was
like
the
tonight.
last. It was the last game Troika did, if I remember. Or was it the second last one they did? Indigo.
I thought it was the last,
It
but
was
I'm
their
dumb.
second of 3 games. Yeah.
Second of 3. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Temple of
Alright,
Elemental Evil 2 years ago. I'm watching it.
Pardon our dust. I just need to crop some stuff here.
No worries.
Yeah.
I can't see it because of my Australian internet. It's still like 10 minutes behind on the stream. So I've just paused it. And I'm just looking in the chat. So
Yeah, this was not intended, but we started late and our friends had to leave early. So let's just see what we can do here.
Far earlier in the stream, you brought up that you moved out of Perth, and I started laughing. And I don't think you ever got context for that. I have a running joke. Because I know a lot about Australia, because Australia and Canada are sister countries, and we mirror each other both in our strengths and weaknesses in like a billion ways. It's astonishing how similar the countries are.
It's a little bit ironic. Yeah, go ahead.
It's eerie, yeah. But I have a running joke that Perth does not exist. People who say they're from Perth are lying. The Australian government made up another city name to make it to act like they have more cities. Not unlike the way that you've heard of Winnipeg, but you don't. You've heard of Winnipeg, and you might have heard someone say that they're from Winnipeg, but you don't actually have any proof that Winnipeg exists. Is because Winnipeg is actually like, you know how on the North Korean South Korean border they have a North Korean city that looks like it's this bustling, beautiful city, but if you actually look with binoculars, it's a fake city made to try and get people to defect from South Korea to North Korea, and it just doesn't work. That's Winnipeg. We're trying to act like we have more cities. We're trying to act like Manitoba has humans, but Manitoba doesn't have humans. But we do have Winnipeg along the border to try and get Americans to move to Manitoba so that we have a population in Manitoba, but it doesn't work. So that's why you've heard of Winnipeg, but it doesn't actually exist. And anything you see on Google is government propaganda.
The only thing I could say about Perth, it is the largest country town in Australia. Like everything about, like, it doesn't really seem like it's just all like you just bump into like people like, oh, I didn't know I'd bump into you here. It's also you know people like by a rule of 3, and yeah, it's also just I've always talked about it here in like people here in Melbourne. They always talk about like, oh, driving for 20 minutes, that's too far away, and I'm like, driving for 20 minutes is like really short here in Perth. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
like,
well, that's the thing. It's Perth. It doesn't exist.
To drive to my friend's place, I have to drive 30 minutes from my house to another. I mean,
yeah. Like, welcome to Canada. Australia and Canada are the 2 most sparsely populated first world countries in the world, so we feel the pain of we both have like 4 or 5 cities that matter in any way, and then everything else, it's like there are large parts of the country where if you live there, you're probably a crazy person in a shack somewhere, because it's like no one, like, what are you talking about? Like, you live in northern Ontario. You mean like if I drive 2 hours north, I'm literally running into native people. we have tribes here, just like Australia. Okay. Like they know English now, and you can like trade cigarettes and crap with them. But like some of the tribesmen will live in the cities, and then some, like, you just go out in the middle of nowhere, and it's like, no, you are legitimately in a forest right now, and you better know the rules with bears. Like, I have fell a tree before. I only had to go like an hour north, and I'm already in the middle of absolutely nowhere where you need to know the bear rules of, you know, if it's what was it? If it's black, fight back. If it's brown, lie down. If it's white, good night. Because you need to know the bear rules. Welcome to Canada. We are still colonial in so many ways. Like, you know, the government will pay you to go to unsettled land and start a hamlet. It's still colonial America, and the majority of Canada is colonial America, where it's unsettled land of just wildlife and lush forests in hills, and no one lives there, and it's very, very cold, and it sucks. And you can see God for Games in the chat. That's my friend Brandon. He said, "That's where I am." Yeah. Don't go to Northern Ontario. It's like Northern Quebec. Like 35% of Canada's population lives in that little U-shaped dip in the east side of the country where it goes down into the Great Lakes near America. That's 35% of our population because it's so cold and uninhabited. Like, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. I
Well,
think
for Australia, it's just, yeah. Go ahead.
No, I was just saying that I think I heard something like 80% of the population is within 100 miles of the border in Canada. Or something
Yes,
like that.
that is also true. Is everyone lives within about an hour of the border. I live in an area. I did the math like a few years ago, so I'm probably forgetting the math a little, and I'm sure it's changed a little bit because population has gone up even more. We get a lot of immigration in Canada, but where I live in the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, which is Toronto and the cities within driving distance to Toronto, it's like because our economy is very Toronto based. You drive into Toronto to work, for like an hour and a half drive to get there, and then you work in Toronto. The GTA is, I believe it was 12% of our entire country's population living on 0.04% of our land. That is our population density thing. We're the second most sparsely populated country in the first world, and yet we have that wicked of population density based around Toronto. That's why if I want to buy a house here where I don't even live in Toronto, I live like a few cities over, I'm like an hour drive away. If I want to buy a house here, starting price for kind of a crap house, but it's like a 2-story house, 2,000 square foot house, a little rundown, is over $1 million. If I want to live in North Carolina, then a 2,000 square foot house that's nicer in North Carolina, in Charlotte, which is the same population as Toronto, Charlotte, North Carolina, $215,000. Do you wonder why I'm immigrating right now? And the tax is lower, and the price of goods is lower. This is Canada. It's very strange. It's bizarro world.
So you either get paid to live somewhere, or you have to pay out the roof to live near Toronto, and there's bears. So
let me tell you about Ontario a little bit. Ontario's nickname is Ontariable because we have Niagara Falls. Now, you'd think we have a hydroelectric dam on Niagara Falls. We must have the cheapest electricity in the world because that is one of the biggest waterfalls in the world. We have the most expensive electricity in Canada because we sell all of our hydroelectric electricity to the States and buy back the surplus. Our money is worth 35% less than yours. Why are we doing that?
Yeah,
Canada. See, I'm the only Canadian who's willing to complain about the things in Canada because we have this weird reputation as a utopia, and we're not a utopia. So I'm like the people who's like, no, if you're moving somewhere, don't move to Canada. You have better choices, please. Live somewhere where it's nice and fun, and you have money to like raise a family, and you don't get taxed to hell, and like the weather won't kill you. I mean, the weather will kill you in America too. There's like hurricanes and stuff, but it'll kill you less.
Well,
like hurricanes, like there's like a 1% chance you get hit by a hurricane. Over here, there's a 100% chance you're going to get hit by winter. So, I'll take my chances in North Carolina with the hurricanes because the hurricanes, 1% chance you get hit. Winter's happening right now. That happens every year. That's a 100% chance I get hit by winter.
I hear you.
Yeah.
So, speaking of high prices and expensive housing, let's talk about eternal grinding in games. So,
so the stream's all good to go like this.
If you want to, yeah, if you're available. I mean, you took the day off, right?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good to go. It's just for the layout that you had, it was all good, yeah?
Yeah, it took me a couple minutes to figure that out. I had to split up the stuff, but it should be all good now. So
grinding. Where can we start? Jesus. Are we talking like MMO? Are we talking about single player? Like, it's abundant in games now.
Yeah, dude, grinding is like 40 hours of every week for me because of Pokemon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I forget about that.
Yeah, because you got a lot of random chance stuff in Pokemon, like 0.01 chance to get a shiny Mew or whatever. It's like,
oh, I don't do shinies. I don't get shiny hunting. I don't get the appeal. I mean, I grind in Pokemon challenges because I do one every single week. So I'll literally be grinding in a Pokemon game while editing another Pokemon run. Sometimes I'll be grinding in multiple Pokemon runs at the same time. And then I also do the video a day thing on my channel. I've been doing a video a day minimum for 8 years. So that's like unrelated to the Pokemon stuff. So like I do like 70 to 80 hour work weeks. No days off because that's lame. So I just grind. I grind a lot.
How are you alive?
This is what I was built to do. I am the most patient man in the world, apparently. I don't know. I have superhuman endurance.
Can you imagine if like there's an alternate timeline where like there's Gattaca, but then like they have people designed to be streamers? It's like this man has endless patience and everything. And he's like raised up in society, becomes a streamer, and that's all he knows. I want to write that story.
Like, there's all this fan art out there of me standing next to a Wobbuffet, which is a Pokemon. Because part of it is that I did a Wobbuffet challenge that people really liked a long time ago when I was first starting to blow up. But also, in the Pokédex, Wobbuffet is referred to as the patient Pokemon, so people say it's my spirit animal.
Oh, no. So, yeah. So you're genetically predisposed, Gattaca style to grind. Is there any particular grinding mechanics that you do not like? I mean, you kind of have to sift through it because...
Yes! Okay, Generation 5 of Pokemon has my least favorite grinding mechanic. So this is why like I'm genuinely considering never doing a Generation 5 Pokemon game again on the show. Because by the nature of the beast of these challenges, if I have a team of one guy, which is a lot of the challenges, then it really punishes you hard with this specific thing I'm about to explain. But it's also horrendous if you have a team of 6 guys, because if I have a team of 6 guys, they're also very weak guys and need to be over-leveled. So what it is in your typical Pokemon game, how much experience you require to level up is based on the Pokemon. A Pokemon is part of one of 4 or 5 categories of how much experience they require between each individual level. There's like slow, medium fast, erratic, and another one that has a word just like erratic, like random, but they're actually different. It's confusing.
That is.
So every Pokemon is in one of those categories. Now, how much experience you get for a battle depends on mostly in most of the games, the base health of the Pokemon that you're beating. And if it's the final evolution of its evolution line or not. So something that would give very little experience is a Caterpie, because it's a low health bug in its first form. Something that give you a lot of experience. Infamously, some of the most experience is a Chansey. Chansey, it's only one form, at least in Gen 1, so it counts as final form, and it has tons of base health, so lots of experience. In Generation 5, they changed it. Generation 5 was starting with Pokemon Black and White on the DS. In that, they made a mechanic where if you are below the level of the thing that you're fighting, you will get a bit of bonus experience towards that Pokemon. If you're above the level, then you get less. Here's the problem. All of a sudden, if you are a casual player of Pokemon, you are probably building a team not based around the best types, but the Pokemon that you casually like the most based on design. That means you're going to have a type lopsided team, naturally, because you're going to gravitate towards types you like, and thus you're going to be predisposed towards grinding. However, because the gym leaders' teams are balanced to deal with a varied team and a team that is just made up of things that you counter, because by that point they're like, okay, if you're electric gym leader, we need to deal with ground types. We don't want to make it that easy, so they have like flying electric things. All of a sudden, they're outsmarting the casual player, and so you need to get to a higher level, but you need to grind, and you grinding to a level above them, the wild Pokemon in the area are going to be a lower level than the gym, which means you have to level on things a lower level than you. Now, there's a rule in that game. Someone did the math. If you're fighting things 12 levels lower than you, which is not at all unheard of if you're grinding for something like the Elite Four, then you have completely undone any advantage you've ever had in the game of fighting things a higher level above you. And it is exponential and horrible, to the point that I have done challenges like beating all of Generation 2, an infamously long one, with a Sunkern, which is the lowest stats Pokemon in the entire franchise, in 1 week. I did Pokemon Fire Red with one Magikarp in about a week and a half. To beat Pokemon Black and White with one Bidoof, a pretty good Pokemon, took me 2 weeks. To beat Black and White with a team of 6 different typed bug Pokemon that were all first form, so low stats, but really good abilities, really good moves, wicked type coverage. This should be a solid team. Was the only time I ever had to miss a week because I wasn't prepared and I didn't think it would take that long because I had to level up 6 Pokemon and they had to be such a high level. And I was leveling on things like 30 levels below me, so I was getting like a quarter of the regular experience. If this were any other Pokemon game before this, I would have had it done in like 5 days. Instead, I believe it took me 12. It is one of the worst grinding mechanics I have ever found in my life, and I understand the idea behind it, but it punches casual players and super hardcore players. It is literally only good for you if you're coming into Pokemon and you want to play to win and you're building the best team you can. If you're min-maxing, basically, that is what it helps, which is not almost anyone playing it.
So where on the Pokemon Company doll did where in the doll did the Pokemon Company hurt you? Everywhere.
Everywhere. Like it's they pushed me down the stairs. I can't point to all the bruises.
So they basically just made it so overall, just the more you grind, the least you'll get. It's just an ever spinning wheel, and everything just takes forever longer. Just they messed up in the algorithm somewhere where the experience just doesn't come as it should, right?
They had an idea, and they had an idea at Game Freak, and they are all like, "Oh yeah, that's really great." People sometimes complain about grinding. This'll make it easier to get up to the level of the gym leader. And then it turns out by happenstance that every person at that table was wrong, and they're also bad people. So that's how that happened.
So Game Freak are bad people. Mah-Dry-Bread 2019.
Yeah.
Well, I think we've gone through that, and I think everybody in chat are, I think somebody said 800% more knowledgeable about Pokemon mechanics now. So
I can teach you so much. I have 20. I have 21 Pokemon challenges out. I'm editing the 22nd one after the stream, and I just finished the 23rd one earlier today, and I'm going on the 24th one tomorrow.
That's wild.
That's a lot of Pokemon.
Yeah, I mean, from what I know, I obviously don't grind that much. As you mentioned, you'd probably be the most grind savvy person in this group that I know about. I just know that recently what I've run into are the monetized grind, basically. Like Red Dead Redemption 2, I jumped into multiplayer because I kind of wanted the interaction with other players. Like I played some poker games with other players, won a bit of money. And just because it's online currency, it feels a little bit more valuable. Like I could actually spend it on something and compete against other players. So I kind of like that more open world, sandboxy kind of feel. And oh my god, that game is grindy. Probably not as grindy as a Pokemon challenge, but they have 2 currencies. One currency you can get fairly easily, and you can buy guns and items and stuff like that. But unfortunately, all weapons, if not all weapons, are level locked or rank locked. So you have to rank up to be able to even buy them. But secondly, ranking up requires you to do a lot of different activities to just rank, leveling, etc. So it's a kind of weird to level lock that many weapons and things behind that, even when you also need currency. I'm not really a fan
I'm confused. Isn't Red Dead like 19010? Or sorry, 1910 AD?
Around that. It might be 1800s. I don't remember the exact year, but around that. Yeah.
Because Red Dead 2 is a prequel, right?
I believe so.
Because Red Dead 1 takes place right before, is like 1910 or something. It's like right before World War 1.
Yeah.
But so Red Dead, if Red Dead 2 is a prequel, then what is like 5-10 years before the first game, something like that?
I didn't jump into the story.
Because the only currency would have been the American dollar. Like there was one currency in America by that point.
The currencies in the game is the American dollar, which is fairly accurate for the time. Like you can buy a gun for like, $50 because
a dollar back then was actually worth a lot.
Missions quite often give you a couple bucks.
Okay, Red Dead 1 is 1911. Okay, that sounds right. 3 years before World War 1.
Right.
And RDR2 apparently is in 1899.
1899. Okay, it was just the American dollar. Like it was uniform. It was completely uniform by then. Like even though the government didn't have a whole lot of sway over. Texas is where the game takes place, right?
Yeah,
Um,
and
I
but in the game they also have at least in the multiplayer they have gold bars, which is basically their monetizable currency. And to be able to
oh.
unlock the frustration I'm running into is I want to be a bounty hunter, right? To be able to
Mhm.
unlock bounty hunting, you need 30 gold bars, at least 25 or 30 gold bars, right? You get fractions of gold bars for completing missions. They have a decimal point on that thing. You can get fractions of gold bars for completing missions. You got to complete a lot of missions to be able to pay 30 gold bars to unlock bounty hunting. And that
No,
was like what I want to
no,
play. But oh, lo and
no.
behold, they have a catalog. You open up the catalog. Hey, you need gold bars? $20. And it's like, okay, yeah, I see why you made the game really, really grindy. So
I
that's been my
deeply
recent
disagree with that.
peeve. Yeah, I disagree with it too, and I won't pay the money, but at the same time, it takes
Mhm.
a lot of time, and not everything gives you gold bars. Some activities do, some don't. Like I was gonna say, maybe I actually cleaned out a couple of games of poker, but that just got me dollars, not bars. So things like that, I'm like, okay, this is basically gems with a different skin. So
Yeah.
unfortunately, we see that kind of mobile game microtransaction influence kind of seeping into games. That's what kind of ticks me off a little bit. I can understand why they do it. Makes them a lot of money. The shark cards, I think, made them more money later on than actual game sales with GTA 5. But it is a trend I'm not particularly happy with.
Yeah, I think for me to follow on with that, with the achieve with the grinding, I should say, the closest thing that I can speak about is rep grinds in MMOs. In my time with current World of Warcraft last year, like rep grinding was it's there's a different like grinding. I remember there was another essay, video essay guy point out how grinding in a video game is a state of mind. It's not really the mechanic, it's the state of mind. But obviously, a lot of people can consider the same mechanic to be grindy. But rep grinds in themselves are just like, especially when the goal is like, you should have this because then you can progress and you have
Yeah,
to repeat the same task over and over, hand in the same token or whatever, just to get like 20 XP out of 1,000 or something. And then what they do is they have a weekend where it's like, oh, double rep grind weekend. And it's like, oh, great. There goes my weekend. Because
yeah,
you feel like you're forced to commit
Yeah.
yourself to be in that treadmill for the next 8 hours.
I think it's
Which
one of the billions of reasons why my mom stopped playing retail and just started using the private servers because God.
yeah. But yeah, that's they've always talked about how they'll fix rep grinds and they'll be like, oh, we'll find like some cool, interesting way. And it kind of knocked me a little bit when like they said like we figured out a solution. We'll make it easier, more XP, more reputation per hand in. I'm like, that's not fixing it.
yeah. You're still doing the same items,
Let's
just not quite as
dumb it
many.
down. Take away all the feeling of earning something.
Yeah.
Sorry, now we're just complaining about retail. Wow, it's awful.
We can move away if you want quickly, Indigo.
Yeah.
Please, let's move on from retail. Wow, it's so
Yeah, let's move on.
depressing.
Look, that's something I've dodged this whole time as well. So
Good.
I've heard
Cl-
great and terrible things. So
yeah,
Yeah.
classic WoW is pretty good, but I can't in good conscience support it right now because I have family in Hong Kong.
oh well.
Yeah, I refuse to pay them any money until at least Blitzchung is unsuspended. At least.
All right. So let's see. We got some more here. Did grinding. Kind of covered long runways. That was similar to the just walking and talking cutscenes and unskippable stuff. Um, this is one interesting topic. This could actually almost be a whole topic in podcast topic in itself. But we're starting to see games. There was that whole open world kind of huge explosion of open world games, kind of resparked by games
Crazed.
like Ubisoft games, Assassin's Creed, things like that. Then we got like Infamous, and we got all these other games. Like every game had to have open world this, and some games benefited from it, I think, and some games just kind of had it because it was something they needed to put into their features list. But
Yeah.
we're seeing again. You mentioned earlier, actually, GriffinMuffin, that Greedfall had almost like a semi hub world design, and
Mm.
I think there's benefits to both of them. Obviously, open world is a bit more expansive, more exploration, things like that. But some of the more tighter game design I've seen is more of a hub world, like the System Shock, the Deus Ex type games, where they have a smaller but very tightly designed world that
Hmm.
every crevice is
And
filled with something interesting. You know.
and to quickly jump off, it's like, yeah, I'm talking about this very subject in my video essay for Outer Worlds, is discussing how what they can do in a hub world compared to an open world. Because that's one thing that a lot of people critiqued Outer Worlds for, was like, oh, it's not an open world game. It's like, no, it's just a bit more confined. But also, if you look at Vampire Masquerade, that's relatively confined as well in a
Yeah.
hub world RPG. And there are advantages to both. It depends on several factors of why you want to do it. Oh, and someone points out Witcher 2 and Witcher 3. Very stark example. Witcher 2 was very hub world, very linear and on the rail, but Witcher 3 just went opened up that world and was like, you can run from one place to the other in like, I remember they did it on a featurette once, but that's that thing where you could just travel in one direction and have it not stop.
Yeah, I'd say like the density of excitement, the density of quality content is definitely something like a hub world game. You don't have necessarily as many things to do. Like there's a finite amount of things to do, but an open world you potentially have, depending on how it's built and randomization, random encounters, things like that, you could have potentially infinite amount of time to spend in there. But your quality content per hour may be much sparser in an open world, compared to a hub world, which has very specific areas you generally only visit once or do in one specific way. So, yeah, I think I've seen a lot of burnout among people. People are saying, "I'm sick of open world games. I'd rather have confined spaces. Give me a really good linear game." And I'm like, I don't think you dislike open world games. I think you dislike boring filler content.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it. Like open world games have so much potential. And I hate to be one of those YouTubers that praises Witcher 3, but I just look to Witcher 3 as an open world game. And I'm like, yeah, like they did it so well, in my opinion, how like you literally just walking down and just quest triggers. And it's such an interesting quest in itself. And not like, my goat's, I just hate to use the goat analogy again, but like my goat's missing. It's always like you walk and you see something. I think in the one quest in, yeah, you were going to say something?
Those goat problems are relatable.
Ah.
Sorry, I was just making a joke.
Okay.
But for open world stuff potentially rocking, I haven't played much Daggerfall yet. But I walked in town and I need to find something. So I flagged down a couple people and I asked them about it, and they told me where to go, and it felt like I was walking through a city. And I got into the building and did the thing. And it's the most pointless thing in the world, and I loved every second of it because it felt like I was in a real city. And even though I could probably just like wander for a really long time and like the vast majority of what's around me is useless, they found a way to make an open world feel meaningful to me in a way that I had never felt before playing any other open world game, where it's not this tiny thing that's supposed to be a big city. I'm supposed to pretend like it's a big city. It was a big city and it was open, and I had to ask for directions, and it didn't feel like a pain in the ass at all. It felt kind of cool.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, I know Nerdslayer's talked about this a bit sometimes, how like VR and open world RPGs inevitably should meet at one point, and it would be like this. It's a very utopian idea of having this game of like you enter a world like that's almost like a second reality, and it's like you have that RPG aspect, and having something like like a contemporary Daggerfall with VR and everything updated with graphically and everything like that. That sounds like this absolutely mind-blowing experience, because Daggerfall, I've watched you stream Daggerfall, Indigo, and it definitely does seem like this. It's an extremely immersive experience. Like you can miss times. It's like, oh, the boat sailed, or like someone's walked away. You're like, crap, what am I going to do now? And you actually, there's consequences, and to get directions, you need to ask the right person. It's just so complex.
Cool.
Yeah. It's a very it's a game you can kind of stumble into an adventure. You just watch one thing happened, you're like, oh man, I missed that date. Let me go this way. Oh, I ran into this encounter. This guy flagged me down. It's systems upon systems upon systems, which may not. It's very dated. It may not all work together well, but yeah, you're right. It definitely has that. It feels like it's probably the only fantasy RPG I've actually played, which actually feels like you're walking through a 1-to-1 scale of a city. Like some of the cities are actually, you could count the population. It's like, oh, this is technically a city. Like there's supposed to be, if you count all NPCs that can spawn in the whole world, it's about close to 1 million NPCs, in the game, which, resembles a real country. Whereas most, if you actually take all the NPCs, in most RPGs, it ranges in the dozens or hundreds, maybe. So it's interesting, and yeah, there's a lot of repetition, a lot of stuff like that, which obviously need to be handled. And not all people appreciate the kind of random, kind of generated nature of that. But if you could take that kind of premise and then just elevate it with more variety, I think that that'd be my ideal fantasy RPG, is something along those lines. But yeah, I mean, again, it's so much easier to get a more curated experience when you're dealing with a smaller scope, and that's why
Yeah.
the kind of hub world seems more attractive, is because you get a very curated experience where things can go one way or the other. And that's one thing I noticed playing Outer Worlds for a few hours. I haven't played through the whole game yet, but I noticed it was definitely a more confined area than something like Fallout, New Vegas, or whatnot. But uh, because of that, it definitely had more you know interesting things per square mile per se.
Yeah. It feels condensed, and also a lot of like you could walk from A to B and you'll notice something that, kind of attracts your eye and you're like, "Oh, what's that?" Or like it because there's a lot more to kind of cram into one area, so you're more than likely to bump into things. And on top of that, you have your obsidian style, well, not obsidian, your like your companion interactions. So like no journey from point A to B feels boring. Like
Yeah.
you always feel stimulated along, unlike as I've mentioned before, Greedfall, where like you just run between zones and you just hold down that button, just run, jump up things, and just nothing happened, which
Yeah.
made the world feel so lonely. But then at the same time, for Greedfall, it's kind of like, yeah, this world is only inhabited by natives, and maybe that could be the effect they were going for. But I don't know. It doesn't create a good experience for the player. It would be great for like maybe some other TV show or something like that to have that sense of open space and loneliness. But for a player, like they need something to, yeah. So
Yeah, and I've heard arguments for and against that. Like you could argue that for like Death Stranding, I haven't played it, but I've watched a few hours, just casually watched it, people streaming it, and 90% of that game is just traveling through empty wilderness. Like,
yeah,
there's things to cross. You have to make bridges. You have to like climb over rocks. You have to make sure that a uncannily amount of equipment on your back doesn't get tipped over or fall or whatever. And there's mechanics along the way, but it's pretty much just getting from point A to point B. Just traveling through a big empty, mostly empty kind of wasteland. So you can make that compelling, and there are like some compelling mechanics in it, but is that you can get almost become like an art critic about it, where it's like, is that intentional frustration? Is it intentional like tedium? Is it intentional solace? And it's like, okay, maybe if you're looking at it as an art, it's kind of like it says something about something. But if people want an exciting adventure, that's not necessarily how you do it. And unless people really, really enjoy just carrying things from point A to point B, I mean, it's seems to be the longest fetch quest, turned into a game that you could possibly design. Not to bash it too much, but
and
there's
also
like,
working in logistics, like looking at something like Death Stranding just makes me go, like he's carrying all this stuff. I'm like, please don't drop it. Do you have all the proper like? Oh, do you have the consignment note for that thing? And I get nervous watching him carry that much stuff.
yeah, like I saw this one where the guy was literally carrying a human parcel on his back. Like she was like had this
Yeah.
like little gizmo that she was like sitting on his back, and he was carrying a person all the way across, like on foot to this other place. And I'm like, my God, there is a sort of certain stress, and you could admire the game to kind of generate that sort of tension, I suppose. But uh, you know, it's weird that some people praise that game to high heaven because of that. When,
Mm.
as far as I understand, listening to any forum, any YouTuber, any community player I've heard, that's the exact like epitome of what people hate about games, are just pointless like trekking with fetch quests or whatever without any context. But yeah, I mean, I said there's good things and bad things about concise, hub worlds. Like I still think Deus Ex is, despite its age, still one of the most articulately designed games ever, just because every level has so many different ways you can manipulate it and beat it and replay it. Same with System Shock and other immersive sims. It's not really a very good term for it, but that's what they're kind of known for. But yeah, I mean, I guess if you have a big world, just make it enjoyable to play through, make it dense enough with interesting content, or at least utilize that scale for something. Like, I think Daggerfall uses the scale to simulate the feeling of a real world. You don't have to travel every single inch of Daggerfall. They have fast travel, but if you want to, you can. It's there. You can literally walk from one side to the other. What guy, a YouTuber, did it, and it took him like a week, to walk from one side to the other in the whole, like a human real life week to walk from one side to the next. But you don't have to spend that much time if you don't want to. I think that I was working on a video. It probably won't be out anytime soon, but I was trying to isolate that kind of feeling. But an RPG, I think, isn't very effective when you know that there's only one real choice to do. Like, even if you're given the other option, if there's only one real choice, it doesn't really feel like you're doing anything. But if you know there's another choice or another way to do something, your choices feel a lot more interesting and more impactful, like you actually made one. If in the end, if yes and no both mean yes, you're kind of like, okay, whatever, it's inevitable. But if you know that you could actually, even if you don't go left, the fact that you can go left, there's that option to go left, it's more interesting, I think. But
Well, that's what one of the main things behind, I forget the name of Stanley's Parable. Is what that's one of the core philosophies behind Stanley's Parable, is that giving players the choice. And then even though the game's saying like, you should go this way, it would be very good for you to go this way, and you go the other way, it's the fact that the player has the choice to go that way, and then the story adjusts to it, is why Stanley's Parable is always looked at this. It's a very, I don't know how to describe Stanley's Parable to like other people sometimes, because it's almost just like a thought experiment within a video game.
It's the most meta game ever. It's very meta.
Yeah.
It's a meta comedy routine.
Exactly.
It knows all the tricks that games do, and plays with that. It plays with your expectations in a narrative form. Like it knows that you subconsciously kind of know all of these things in games because you've played games before. It knows all these things. And where
Yahtzee Crochet's doing. Oh, sorry. You continue.
No, it's fine. It just it plays with all the meta cliches and good and bad tropes of game design. It just puts all those together and screws with you in that way. And so when you think you need to know, you think you've outsmarted the game, it actually has built up your expectations, and to a point where it knows you're going to try the other thing, and then it throws you another curveball. I don't remember exactly who designed the game, but it kind of seems like it's almost like somebody who had either played a ton of games or made a ton of games decided to kind of mess with the formula a bit and put that together. But yeah, it's definitely, if not a particularly great game in terms of crazy new gameplay mechanics, it's a very interesting narrative and, like you said, a thought experiment.
Yeah. Because Yahtzee Crochet's doing his I think he's doing a challenge at the moment of creating a certain amount of games in a year, I think it was, if I remember correctly, or a certain time of months. But he's creating like rapid fire games but each game is having like a kind of a different thought experiment with it. Like one game that I managed to have a look at was one where it's like do not press the button or the cat dies. And it will play out this narrative of like, oh, the cat graduates and goes to university, graduates and goes to get a job, and that cat gets a job, and then it raises a family, and like every once in a while, something will try and press the button. You have to slap it away or have the choice to. That's it. 12 games in 12 months. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he makes a lot of good games. I like a lot of his games.
And it's all
Consuming Shadow, Ecstasy Sauerkraut.
The dog dies. Sorry, I thought it was cat. Maybe it's just because it's like, where did my cat? Oh, there she is. Okay, never mind. But yeah, it's a similar point of having a thought experiment of like of narrative. Basically, it's really good stuff. But yeah, we were talking about hub worlds and open worlds, but it just went into metagaming or something.
Yeah, that's not even my fault.
That was not Mah-Dry-Bread's fault this time.
Yeah,
this time.
Yeah, we've actually gone through a lot of these. There's a couple others. There's like chance mechanics, loot boxes. I've kind of tiptoed around that a little bit. New Game Plus. Do you guys have thoughts on that? New Game Plus is kind of an emerging trend. I mean, it's
cool as hell.
Yeah, I think
it was an emergent trend. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around forever.
I think
awesome.
it's kind of.
I think if it's dressed up a bit better. Yeah. If it's dressed up better, I could play it. But usually, there's not a lot of appeal, especially for like narrative-heavy games. Like Witcher did it, and I was going to do it, but then I'm like, I've kind of already played it. But you know, a couple years down the line, like I have Witcher 3 installed, and whenever I have a moment where like I feel like, you know, just getting back into Witcher, or like I'm waiting for another game to be released, I'll hop back into Witcher 3. But I don't have the saves on this computer, so I'm starting off from normal. But if I progress through it, complete it, and then have the option of New Game Plus, that would be pretty good. But it's also like, it's also very easy for a developer to add it and then have it as content, because you're essentially it's just another version of, it's just another playthrough of the game, except some things are added, removed, etc. So.
Yeah, I like the concept. If it has to be different enough, though. I'm not, generally not, like, aside from a couple games that are just so wildly different each playthrough that you can kind of play it again and again. But if a game is pretty much like one narrative where level 1 is the same, level 2 is the same, it takes a lot for me to replay a game if I've played the game recently. My most recent example that I can think of for a pretty narratively narrow game would have been actually Resident Evil 2 Remake. They did an interesting thing. You can either play Leon or Claire, and their campaigns are fairly similar. They're pretty similar. They have different dialogue and things like that. But the cool thing is that they've got Playthrough B, which is their version of New Game Plus. And it uses a lot of the same environments, but everything's different. Ammo, locked doors, keys, enemy placements, and certain areas are on Playthrough A only, and certain areas are on Playthrough B only. So you're basically exploring the same kind of police station, mansion, etc., but everything's just different a little bit, and so they can reuse a lot of the same assets. So it's not like building a whole new game. It's probably honestly a fraction of the development time as building the first playthrough, but it's different enough that things catch you. Like, you know, you might have walked down one hallway the first time, and it's like, oh, that one's pretty safe. It might be one little zombie or whatever. Walk that down the next time, there's a crawler there, and you're like, oh crap, that's very different from the first time. I can no longer rely on my memory of the first playthrough anymore. Everything's very different. So I think that was a great way of doing that. And I played playthrough A and then immediately started playthrough B shortly after that. So it was actually pretty interesting. So if games that's a bit harder to scale up to something like a full-on, you know, open world RPG, but you have to kind of introduce something different, I think, because if you essentially just replay the game again, what's the point? Like, what the games do is they keep your character level with all your abilities and start another game at a higher difficulty, essentially. That's fine.
Yeah, it's fine, but it's like, it's kind of like sort of not the point when you do another playthrough. Like, another playthrough is, oh, I'll try this out, is usually the approach you have for doing a new playthrough for an RPG. So having stuff stay there is like, oh, that's neat. And there's also stuff, I think Batman, the Arkham games, did a New Game Plus, and it's like, oh, you get all the gadgets from the get-go, if I remember correctly. And I'm like, Okay, that's kind of cool. I guess that just means you breeze through the game really quickly. But does that? I never started it. I never did it because it was such a weird concept to grasp. So I was like, oh, thank you for telling me I have New Game Plus. Like, that's nice. I'll
So,
play this other
how
game now.
familiar are you guys with the original Resident Evil 2?
I'm not too familiar with it.
I don't think I played through the whole thing, but I did play it back on the PS1 back in the day. Yeah.
Okay, the original Resident Evil 2 did the path scenario A and scenario B thing 1,000 times better than the remake. This is something that I actually know quite a bit about the remake because I am friends with a lot of horror game speedrunners due to my own horror game speedrunning. And so I know that quite in depth, that it was a massive disappointment to a lot of Resident Evil 2 fans, where a lot of them really, really liked the game, but they didn't like the B scenario because Resident Evil 2 did B scenario so phenomenally well that the idea behind it was you play either Claire or Leon, and you do scenario A. When you beat the game, what you then do is that save file becomes scenario B of the other character. And what you're doing now is you pick them and you're playing through the entire story of where were they during your scenario A. And it's different. Like, so different that they're going to different places. There are different bosses. There are different plot things because people might be alive or not alive depending on the actions of your previous playthrough with the other character. To the point that there are 4 distinct playthroughs of the game with different parts of plot, different bosses, different locations that you visit, entirely based around your decisions the first time you played. And you had no warning of this when you did your scenario A. So you beat the game, the credits roll, you think it's over, then you unlock scenario B, and all of a sudden everything you just did has consequences for your entirely new playthrough. Whereas in the remake, probably because of the scope of the game, like that is a very daunting task to make what I just described there. Yeah. They didn't do that. In fact, it was a very, very watered down version of scenario A, scenario B. So like there's actually a playthrough of that game that is considered canonical. That is scenario A is Claire, and then scenario B is Leon. That's the only way the plot could make sense with the other games. But you could play the game you could do 4 full playthroughs and have it be drastically different as a result of your actions, in a way where you don't even know what you need to change. All you need to know is I'll beat a fresh file with Claire and beat a fresh file with Leon, and then when I go back in there, it'll call it B and switch my character, and now I've got a whole new game to play with some familiar locations. And that is incredible. Like, you know, the Mr. X, the guy stalking you through Resident Evil 2, he's B scenario only. You played through the whole game in Resident Evil 2. And then when you do the B scenario, you're Leon or you're Claire, whoever you didn't use the first time, you're going through these hallways and you're like, okay, I feel safe. I know the ins and outs of the department. All of a sudden, this dude crashes through a wall.
That's horrifying.
It is horrifying. And he is scary as hell. He didn't have the dumb hat. And like, don't get me wrong, the X thing looks cool in the remake of 2. I'm sure I'll like it when I play it. I need to get around to it. It looks like a really fun remake. I'm excited to play it, but in the original Resident Evil 2, it's literally like you just beat the whole game and then you suddenly discover this whole new mode. The game's way longer than that. It's like when you beat Pokemon Gold for the first time. The credits roll, you're the new Pokemon champion. Elm calls you in and you're like, here's a ticket to Kanto, and you go there, and literally the entire map of the first game is there with new boss fights. And it's like, this game is way bigger than I had any idea, and it just blows your child mind without the murder charge. So the same thing happens with Resident Evil 2 back in the day of, you go back in, and you're like, whoa, there's way more to this than I thought. And then you play a little bit, and you're like, okay, it's still familiar, though. I know what I'm doing. And then a dude crashes through the wall, and the game is real different. Yeah. And you start to see, like, oh, this isn't where it was because, like, I opened this gate on the previous character. Like, there's a whole different puzzle for me now. It's incredible.
Yeah.
Thank you for dropping this mad knowledge, Mah-Dry-Bread. You're welcome.
No, I really enjoy the RE2 remake. I don't think I ever completed all of the original RE2, even though it was probably one of my favorites of the original tank control engine games. Everybody said Thomas the Tank Engine in the chat, so I dubbed in the tank engine. Tank control games.
One day we will play Outbreak together, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, I like the originals, and I didn't realize that it had sort of it remembered your first playthrough and altered the game to the next playthrough. Yeah, as far as I know,
So cool.
playthrough A and B in RE2 Remake is static. Like no matter what you do in playthrough 1, playthrough 2 is its own thing. Which that sounds awesome. I do like that idea. Like how cool would that be if like everything you took in playthrough 1 wouldn't be there for Claire in playthrough 2 or vice versa.
Yeah. That's part of it. It's like what's laying around is different because you might have looted something differently. Like in canon of RE2, 2 playthroughs back to back in sequence are what the canon is, whereas in the remake it's just one thing. Like one thing doesn't affect the other in any way.
Yeah, I can see that.
I think that's actually the.
Sorry, go ahead.
I think that's the core of this. Having New Game Plus actually means something, or at least a second playthrough is to have it mean more by actually having it mirror one another or having it interact in some way, consequences from one another. Like someone pointed out Undertale, one playthrough, the second playthrough, because it's a meta game, people will actually reference what you did in the first playthrough, stuff like that. I think of New Game Plus is to be considered to be taken more seriously as like added content rather than just more content, that it needs to be more significant. It needs to actually interact a bit more with the first playthrough, with the player, with other worlds, etc.
Yeah, you could make a really interesting, not to go off on a tangent, but you can make a really interesting game playing on that sort of mirror gameplay. Like imagine if you played through the game with one player or whatever. Let's use the Resident Evil like PlayStation / mansion type scenario. You played through with one character, and you play through again, and there's like your other character going through and doing the motions that you did, but you can see from like another character's viewpoint or whatever. Like how like they would actually start taking items and stuff in real time, and you had to like try to grab them before them, or all sorts of weird stuff like that. Or depending on how well you did in your first playthrough, will make your second playthrough harder or easier. How effective you were at killing zombies in the first playthrough will make your second playthrough harder or easier. Like things like that. If you really did it, I don't know how much they went into the original RE2 on that regard, but that is a really interesting idea how you could actually play with
Here's an example of that. There's a boss in RE2 that's a giant alligator in the sewers. It's mostly there because it's cool. I've actually watched a playthrough of it with one of the developers there, and they explained it as it was cool. There's no reason why there's a giant alligator there. It's not even a zombie. But with the giant alligator, you're running away from it for screen and screen and screen until you have to confront it. And there's 2 ways to beat it. Either you keep shooting it as many times as you can on each screen, and then you run away, and you keep shooting, and you run away, and eventually it'll back off. Or, at the end, you can get it to grab a canister in its mouth and shoot the canister, and it blows its head off. When you do the B scenario, if you'd wounded it until it ran away, it's coming back for the next human it finds, which is you on your next playthrough with the other character, and it's pissed. But if you blew its head off with a canister, it's not there. It's dead.
Wow.
So there's a whole boss fight right there that exists or doesn't exist based on what you did in your previous playthrough.
That is pretty cool. I like that idea. Yeah, I can see why people would be disappointed. I think they were trying to. I'm actually surprised that RE2 Remake ever even existed, because it didn't seem like that was going to happen. So they did a great job with it, in my opinion. But yeah, I can see why. I always complain when games get a sequel or a remake or whatever, and they take out certain key features or bits of depth like that. So,
that's why RE1 Remake was beautiful.
Yeah, it was one
best remake I've played in my life. They added stuff, and it felt like it could have been there in the first place. It's so well done. I think it's the best remake I've ever played in my life, is RE1's remake. So good. It's unbelievable.
I actually got to play that a little bit. My wife was next to me as I played it, and I'm like, this is so like old school. Like I didn't get into PlayStation 1 because only got a PS2. That was like my earliest console was a PS2. Other than that, I've just been PC. So like when you talk about these PS1 games, I only kind of know about them actively. I never played them upon release or even around the time. But I remember thinking, like, even when I played Medieval at PAX this year, the remake. Yeah. And I was like, whoa, these controls, like, they're so sporadic. Like, I move in one direction, he's like, whoop, it flies. I'm like, I am not used to this. But someone in the background's like, yeah, this is how, like, PS1 games were. I'm like, Oh, well, I played a couple of PS1 games, but they just weren't in that typical style, apparently.
Yeah, games back then, they were like extremely responsive. Like if you turn right, your character wouldn't do a dramatic turning animation and start wandering right. It would just be like all of a sudden you're flipped and you're now going
Yeah.
right. Like it was very, very hyper responsive because there were no like transition animations or anything like that. So it is definitely a more gamey, less realistic, looking experience. But it is
Mm.
interesting. I think we have definitely kind of an exception with remake culture, both in movies and games, and TV shows and stuff, where we're just remaking absolutely everything because of
We
nostalgia.
seriously are. It's crazy.
Yeah,
Have you
it's like,
looked at how many RTS remakes there are?
yeah, it's
It's
wild,
crazy.
but you know, there are some games I think could use a second once over to get audience. Some games honestly aren't aside from graphics are actually quite competent and ahead of their time. Where some games you're like, oh yeah, this could definitely need some real works, and I think that's where you draw the line between like a 100% pretty much true to form remake like RE1 remake.
Mhm.
That's like pretty much taking the exact same game, adding a couple things, and just you know better presentation,
You
or a
could call
game
that
Well,
a
it
remaster.
actually added tons of game mechanics that were
okay,
fantastic, but like
Okay.
it added entire areas, it added entire plot lines, it added entire things about replayability, including going back through the own same mansion, like doors that the handle could break through enough uses. Um, they added red. Oh, I'm blanking on the name now, but when you go back through the mansion after you've mostly cleared it out, after getting through the first boss area, some of the zombies' corpses that are laying around, Crimson Heads, some of the zombies that were on the ground may end up becoming Crimson Heads, which are faster, more dangerous zombies that have gotten back up because you didn't burn the bodies. There's
oh
all
no,
kinds of mechanics added to the game that really add so much to it, and they all feel so natural. Where, I also beat the original, and it felt so natural when I first played the remake that I was genuinely second guessing myself on if some of the things were in the original or not because everything felt so like it was supposed to be there in the first place. It
yeah,
was that well done. So, and then visually it looked beautiful and it controlled well and everything. But even the new mechanics they made were it really did feel like it was supposed to be there, and they did an amazing job. When it comes to remaking games, though, as far as immaculate of a job they did on that, I think that usually the games that need to have a remake the most are games that were ahead of their time in a way that the hardware held them back. An
yeah,
example of that I would say is if you're going to remake a bunch of Resident Evil games, remake Outbreak and Outbreak File 2. I understand they didn't sell very well outside of Japan, but they are very fantastic games, and they were held back by how, as great as they were and as good as the single player was, because the AI was actually quite good. It's team-based games, though. And so the multiplayer was by far the most fun part, but it was PlayStation 2 multiplayer,
just way too
server-based
early.
PlayStation 2 multiplayer. Like the load times between doors was very poor, and that really mattered in online where, you had to be responding to people. There was no voice chat at all. So it was very hard to communicate with people. There was only a text chat in the lobby before you start. Playing that game nowadays on emulator where the load times are lightning quick and the game emulates perfectly with like no special things you have to do, which is lucky. And we have like Discord now to talk to each other. It's a really, really, really fun experience. You could remake those games, slap them on Steam, and have online through that. And a lot of people would love them to the point that there's been games inspired by the Outbreak games, and all of them are terrible. So we need an official one.
So tell that to a big publisher to say this game has been remade many times and it's terrible. Make it.
Well,
But no,
that's the thing is like
I
people
get
have
you.
made
Yeah,
rip-offs of it that
yeah,
totally miss the point of what made it fun. That's the problem.
yeah, and that's the problem. Whenever there's a great idea, like I can't tell you how many remakes there are of certain games that I love. Like they never quite get it right. It's like they get like the visuals or like the cosmetic things right, but they don't get a certain gameplay feature that's core to the experience quite down. Like a lot of
Mm.
these people aren't as experienced game designers. So they're trying to mimic really fine tuned engines with very limited experience. So yeah, I see what you mean with that. But yeah, remakes are a really interesting beast because you can actually not remake something enough and disappoint people greatly, because people, when you present something that's outdated in a much prettier shell, people will all of a sudden notice all of the cracks underneath, all the old, outdated, low, quality of life stuff that you didn't notice back then because that's how games were. But now you're like, oh man, these controls are really rough, or oh man, I didn't realize just how much busy work it was in this menu, or oh god, I have to pause every 5 seconds because of this, or they didn't actually have a quick menu for changing my weapon. I have to go into this complex inventory system, switch it, go back, and then that's just how games were back at the time. So you can actually
Ocarina of Time Water Temple, taking your boots on and off just to get genuinely 5 seconds apart to go through some hallways. That was one of the things around the DS one, though. You just hit a little thing on the touchscreen and it just takes your boots on and off. There's no difficulty change at all. It just saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, and that's quality of life features. I mean, games now, you're expected to have a much easier go at it for players, a much less tedious go at it for players. So, those kind of things are expected now. But if you make a true remake of a game and don't, smooth over those rough corners, you can get, backlash. So how much you change or how much you clean up or smooth out or polish is a big factor. And then, one hand you get a game like, RE1 Remake, which is a pretty true to form thing with some additions and things that were fixed. Then on the other hand, you get something, it's not necessarily bad, but this Final Fantasy VII Remake is a completely different game. You could argue it's not even a remake, it's a reinterpretation. It's not a remaster, it's not a remake, really. It's not even the same genre. It's not even really a JRPG. It's a, action RPG, somewhat of a Western style RPG hybrid thing with like kind of pause, real time with pause combat, and that may be great. It may be awesome, but it's so different that you might actually alienate the original fans. But then again, if you were to take Final Fantasy VII as is and make it prettier, people would have forgotten how many random encounters that I replayed that game a couple years ago. The game has a ton of random encounters that are really, really annoying. And there's a lot of slow parts. There's a lot of great moments. It's still a great game, but people would have forgotten all of the rough edges because the really high moments stand out in your memory rather than the hours and hours and hours of just walking 5 steps, random encounter, 5 steps, random encounter, 5 steps, random encounter, So
if I can make a hot take real quick, Final Fantasy VII is not as good as everybody says. It is a game with a fantastic story told to you by a blithering moron. I have asked dozens of people to give me the synopsis of what is the plot of Final Fantasy VII, and they all have such drastically different answers because no one gets the same thing out of it because the story is told to you so poorly. If you wiki dive hard enough and you find every little thing and you learn the whole story, it's really great. It's a shame they told it to you like an idiot.
yeah,
And I like a lot of Final Fantasy games, earlier in the series and later in the series. That one got by on its looks because good God.
yeah, no, it's and again, you can the whole subjectivity thing. You can look at it like, oh, maybe it's supposed to be fractured because Cloud has such a fractured and broken mind, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that
There's fairness to that.
Yeah, some moments I think are very effective because it's not told in a very logical, sequential format. Like some of the parts are like, I actually, before I replayed it for my video a couple years ago, I actually forgot whole sections of that game because they weren't actually real. They didn't actually happen. I misremembered the fake stuff with the real stuff. I thought that a certain person did this thing, but actually it was a different person because a whole part of the story was actually unreliable narrator. And you're like, okay, that's weird. And half remembering a game from 1997, you're gonna misremember some things, especially when half of it was from an unreliable narrator. But
and that's not necessarily bad either. I think that Final Fantasy VII, it's one of the few non-horror games to ever genuinely really creep me out and fascinate me.
Really creepy game.
And even though I played that when I was a bit older, for some reason, there's very specific visuals that creep me out and would kind of stick with me. And visuals don't really stick with me because I have aphantasia. I can't picture things in my head. But the thought of certain things would really bother me growing up. And one of those was even though I didn't grow up with a PlayStation, so I had limited experience with Final Fantasy VII. Was what was the name of the town that Cloud came from again? Not Midgar. Midgar was the
the
dome.
town you started down.
What was the town that Cloud remembered getting like
Niflheim.
Niflheim.
Yeah.
I believe that's what it was. The whole Niflheim incident, just even like them referring to it as the Niflheim incident and like seeing it get burned down. You walk there and it's fine. And it looks for something about seeing it exactly how it was before it was burnt down and knowing this was burnt down, our character believes this was burnt down, and like everything's off, and you walk there and it's got that slightly haunting music and there's that slightly haunting mansion and everything. Something about that was so eerie to me, and it's like, this is genuinely kind of disturbing. Like, and it's funny because I prefer so many other Final Fantasy games. I thought 6, sometimes called 3, was really, really great. I think 4, sometimes called 2, was really, really great. I think Final Fantasy 1 was great in its own way. It had a really good Game Boy Advance remake. Final Fantasies 2 and 3, like the actual 2 and 3, 2 kind of sucked. 3 was just 5, but not as good. 5 was better. But
my fiance's playing through 2 right now, and there's actually an exploit in that game. One of the best ways to level up your characters is to attack your other party members.
Yeah, just punch each other. Yeah, because that had this stupid leveling system where using a skill makes you better at that skill, which sounds on paper like, yeah, there are games like that. No, I mean, to get health, you have to get hit. So, like, your mage in the back row who rarely gets hit, you want him to get more health? Okay, you gotta go grind for a while. And by grind, I mean fight something weak and just spend your time punching your mage and then healing him. Like, it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard. I can't believe that game got sold to humans. Like, and then there's like Final Fantasy VII where the combat's fine. And there's a lot of haunting things like I'm deeply afraid of underwater because I can't swim and almost drowned a few times.
Yeah.
So the idea of I think it's the Sapphire weapon, the one underwater, that haunts the shit out of me. A lot of the visuals are very haunting to me because I find there was something about there's certain eras of game where the way that they animate things creeps the hell out of me often. Yeah. The 2 biggest examples of that would be, 1, there's a lot of PlayStation 1 stuff with weird polygonal things or sprites that are scaled too high so they're blocky, like Niflheim looks like that. And there's something haunting about that because it's just not right. And the other haunting thing is playing PC games. PC is almost always PC RPGs with a general medieval fantasy setting during like a certain period of time, like Daggerfall and Morrowind both have a lot of things that would look totally normal in any other game, but haunt the hell out of me when I see them in those games. And it's intriguing, like, not haunting in a turn-off game kind of way, haunting in like I want to explore more, and I know I'm going to jump at something that wasn't meant to be scary, but I'm so into it.
Somehow the way it was rendered, the early CG plus the lighting, it's very, very dramatic, like very another game that's also really good around that time was Parasite Eve. It just had a very kind of off-putting, offset.
I still need to play it.
Unsettling. It was also another Square game, but yeah, I know what you mean.
It seems cool.
Yeah, no, I played it, streamed it like October. I think it was last game I streamed in October. One of the last games I streamed in October just now. It holds up pretty well. I just ran an EPSXE, just the emulator. It was fine, but we're so off topic. But yeah, no, I totally know what you mean. There's a very weird, unsettling late '90s aesthetic that a lot of games did. That kind of CG that's very creepy. It's not really realistic. It's just got a very creepy, otherworldly feel to it, and
it's hard to put your finger on what it is.
Yeah, it's just very. It's synthetic, but strangely, I don't know. I can't really put it into words, but it
probably triggers something to do with the uncanny valley with our minds.
Maybe.
Probably. Yeah, but there's some great scenes in 7. I think 7, it was definitely, I'd say it's probably aesthetically the darkest, Final Fantasy game. I think, what's his name? Oh Lord, the designer of the Final Fantasy series.
Oh shit! Now that you say it, I've heard the name a bunch of times, and it's not coming to me.
Yeah, I forget, but his mother died around the time, so he was in a pretty dark place. But Nobuo Uematsu soundtrack for some of those tracks. I think it's definitely up there as far as soundtracks. Some of those tracks, like the Niflheim, the music playing through that is just like really, really haunting.
Oof.
And some of those
Yeah.
and the cutscenes in that game were actually quite short, but they were so sudden and unexpected that they just kind of like they showed you a really graphic image and then cut away from it really quickly. And I think they were very effective because of
Yeah.
that. It was almost like a kind of like the what's a movie that does that? Kind of like The Exorcist a little bit. They show you a little bit of something very kind of weird and react, and then it would cut away. Like I remember
Mhm.
the first time you see Genova, for example, just you see this weird.
Oh
blur-
yeah,
blurry
the
shape.
whole idea of
Yeah.
Genova creeps me out. Like there's so much
Yeah.
haunting stuff in that game, and like on some level it's probably supposed to creep you out, but I do think that the medium of the game and the limitations of the time made it even more haunting in a
Yeah.
way that I really, really like. Like it was probably a happy accident more than anything, but as someone who's really into that kind of haunting intrigue, I love that. That's fascinating to me. I see people in the chat bring up Sweet Home, by the way, which was a large inspiration for Resident Evil. It was an NES RPG that was a horror game that had cutscenes that were like really haunting, had a lot of haunting stuff in it. Sweet Home's a fantastic game. And yes, there was a Sweet Home movie that was also scary as hell.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. Yeah, it's those kind of early kind of survival horror games. You forget that they go back that far. I mean, at one point, Castlevania was considered a horror game, even though it's kind of a little bit silly
That's wild
now.
to think.
Yeah, it was like a horror action game, but I mean, it was
Is
supposed to be
there a
kind of
remake
creepy.
of Sweet Home? It looks like there's.
Is
has
there
it
a
been
remake of
done
is
recently?
there?
Home Sweet Home. This one says.
Oh, okay, that's not the same thing. Yeah, there's a game on NES called Sweet Home. If you just like go do NES Sweet Home Google image
Yeah.
search.
I just found it,
Like-
but then as a result, it linked in all this. I thought maybe the two might be related, but maybe just to share the name. So
I don't think that would be really, but if you just image search NES Sweet Home, you'll see like a lot of the images that would be really haunting for the time. Like they even look pretty creepy
would be.
now.
Yeah, they look pretty
Would
good. Very.
It's a good game.
Yeah, it's interesting what you can pull off, and also like you're looking at it through a high res LCD screen, but at the
Mhm.
time you're looking at through. There's actually examples where they take the same sprite in like the actual pixels, and an HD screen, and the same sprite in its a CRT screen, and you see so much more detail. Like
Yeah.
imagined like rounded out details and whatnot in the CRT monitor version that you wouldn't see just looking at the pixels, but because of the
Mhm.
scan lines and everything, there's so much suggested detail that you wouldn't normally get, and they designed those sprites for that medium. So back in the day, they look a lot better than it does now. But
If you want a great segue, by the way, Sweet Home had permadeath. You only had 5 characters in the whole game. You had them from the start. They all had very vital things that they did. And if any of them go to 0 health, or if you don't do a trap properly, permadeath, and it's like a straight RPG of trying to get out of this mansion, beginning to end. And if someone permanently dies, then you need, not only is the game harder as an RPG because you need to level more and be extra careful and everything with your characters, but you also need to pick up extra items that would act for the role of whatever that character's special item was. And inventory management, everyone can only hold 2 items plus their
no.
special item. So like, one guy had, I think it was a flashlight. If he's permanently dead, you got to go find a lighter, and someone's going to have to carry that thing around to do the same role. Like another person is like a photographer. They always have a camera with them. You need to be able to get a camera that someone else has used an inventory slot for if that person were to die. And there are different endings for what combination people are alive at the end. NES game, like 1988, I want to say.
that's like I mean,
It's so cool.
Those were all the selling points for Until Dawn. Actually, the whole characters can die. Different endings, different.
It wouldn't
narratives
surprise
and
me
stuff like that.
if in some way it was inspired down the line of inspirations, because Sweet Home was what inspired Resident Evil. In fact, Resident Evil's door opening transitions to mask loading screens came from Sweet Home.
That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really cool.
No, I think we've gotten through most of the list. There's a couple of the little stragglers. I do want to wrap it up pretty soon, but do you have any thoughts on cross-platform play? I noticed that's kind of made a comeback. There was an attempt at one point to do cross-play between consoles and PC, where I think the one of the most famous examples or infamous examples was the Shadowrun game that they made for the Xbox 360, where you could actually have PC players fighting console players in the same matches.
That's
And
cool.
cool, except for the console players got massacred because of the PC players
Yeah.
had just better controls, better frame rates,
Mouse and
better-
keyboard.
Yeah, mouse
Yeah.
and keyboard warriors. But it's actually gotten a comeback. Call of Duty has cross play. How weird is that? The latest Call of Duty
Yeah.
game has cross play. What are your thoughts on that? Like, I kind of think that it's kind of an eventuality, because as consoles start to get, I think you can actually get a mouse for Xbox Ones now, and I used to with PS3. I don't know if you used to be able to play it on games much, but as consoles become more like PCs, it's kind of almost an eventuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the main advantages behind consoles. I know my mate, for example, back in Perth, he only like 2 months ago got a proper PC for him to play on. He's just been playing console for most of his life, because he approaches gaming like, I just want to buy the one thing that ensures that I can play a game that day.
Yeah.
He just wants that convenience, and that's what consoles can provide. Like, it's pretty much like a pre-built, like essentially it's coming towards getting pre-built PCs and just having that assurance of I can play any game on here. I don't have to check the specs. I don't have to do anything. I have like all the controls with me and everything. You just plug it in and put the CD in or download the game and just start playing. And that's what the advantage consoles have. So having those two markets begin to have the Venn diagram start to overlap a little bit, maybe consoles will start having keyboard, mouse, and just people play
Peripherals.
on their laps. Yeah, they have peripherals like that and just play on their laps on the couch. I know plenty of people that do that with PC. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean and especially if there's something that's mouse and keyboard's been holding on for quite a while, but I doubt it's the end goal of all gaming. I'm sure there's somebody hasn't quite put together yet that'll be a little bit more accurate, a little bit less stress on your hands. Something, maybe motion control will be better, or you can actually aim with your fingers through the air. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, as more technology comes out, and honestly, consoles are actually losing some of their best qualities recently, with having to update them constantly, having to run out of hard drive space, getting poor performance, having multiple tiers of consoles now. I mean, this latest gen actually surprised us with now having like 2 or 3 tiers of power levels. You've got your Xbox One, Xbox One S, Xbox One X, where you're not going to get the same experience out of each of them. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like some games just don't run very well on the vanilla Xbox, and
Yeah.
that used to be a thing where, like, if you buy this console, you'll be able to play every single game really well, but now you don't really get that experience much anymore. So
I think it's because of the rate that we release games and develop games and everything like that. Consoles
Yeah.
are becoming less and less future-proof. Like,
Yeah.
I bought a PS2. I remember how long I had a PS2 for, and I had it for so long until the
Mhm.
PS3 came along. It's just
Yeah,
it's
PS2,
just a different sort of
new games were coming out for the PS2 well into the PS3's life cycle. Like it died,
Yeah.
I think, possibly like 4 or 5 years into the PS3's life cycle. They just stopped making PS2 games, but it had a.
I'm pretty
incredibly
sure the
long
last
lifespan.
PS2 games were made when the PlayStation 4 was out.
Really, it could be, yeah.
Yes, it's astonishing. Like, the PS2 is the longest actively developed for a console of all time, I believe.
It was also one of the most popular, so that makes sense. And
Yeah.
certain games had a really long lifespan, like the FIFA games and things like that, sports games.
San Andreas.
San Andreas, yeah.
San Andreas sold like crazy for like a decade. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, but I'm open to it. I mean, I actually was able, and it's partly due to like probably mechanics put in place for controller users. But for a while, I was playing Titanfall on PC with a controller, and I was able to top the charts sometimes. So it wasn't a completely unfair advantage. Probably due to some like slight aim adjustments and things like that you can't really tell, but they do probably have a little bit of auto aim for console or for controller players. But
Yeah.
it's interesting. Like, how do you bridge that gap? I personally like it because I've seen a lot of PC games. have their community die, and there's one of those things like once a community gets lower than a certain amount, it just inevitably just dies out because not enough people to get regular games, so people turn away from the game, and therefore the population continues to decrease. There's the death spiral basically. But with if consoles and PCs can play on the same in the same matches, you can essentially keep the game alive indefinitely until everybody stops playing.
Mhm.
Paragon did this. Paragon did crossplay between PS4 and PC. And as a player of Paragon, you noticed. I can't remember at what point they put PS4 in their own thing or whatever, but you would notice when you were up against a console player, like it's a MOBA with aiming, like you can actually aim at the ground and like it's a 3D like perspective, not like a top-down MOBA. It was 3D, so like you could really tell when people would like miss with like aimed projectiles. You're like, what? You know, how would you miss that? I was right here. But yeah, with a console, although there's some people who are really good with playing with controller and all that sort of stuff, so it's not to neg the people who play on console and stuff and say there's some sort of decreased skill. At no point, like mastering that controller with that game would have been absolutely phenomenal to watch. But I think off the bat there would be a definite advantage.
Yeah, you just get so much more granularity. Like, there's only so much your thumb can move, but you can move your mouse like way. You can get so much more pinpoint accuracy.
An analog stick has a range of motion of 1 inch.
Yeah.
Whereas my shoulder has a range of motion of my desk. Like, it's not comparable. Like, it's a complete unfair advantage to have a mouse.
And not just that, but the hardware advantages, better frame rates, better resolutions. Quite often console games run at like sub HD or just 1080p, whereas some people are playing 4K at 144 hertz or whatever. It's not really it's not a comparable experience. But I know that some people, like the best console players, can defeat most, probably over half of the PC players at least. But the best PC players will generally trump the best console players just due to hardware differences. But a couple games to try it out. I think Gears of War 4 had crossplay. I don't know about 5. Rocket League finally did crossplay, cross PS4 and Xbox, which was impressive. Halo Master Chief Collection, I think, is doing something with that. They're at least doing cross progression, possibly cross play at some point. But yeah, it's a cross platform. It's still sketchy, but as consoles and PCs become more the same, I think it'll kind of continue. But I think it's overall probably a good thing. But I think that the way that Call of Duty handled it is that you can just turn off crossplay if you want to, which I think is fine. Like if you don't want to play in mixed servers, you don't have to. But yeah, it's one of those things. They don't really have a perfect solution for it yet because it's just not the same experience. All right. Well, I think we're pretty much through most of the list. Do you have anything else you want to bring up? Any other thoughts before we end off?
No, I even got to mention the RTS remake stuff. So yeah, I'm all good then.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for coming on. Sorry for the delay in the setup. Now that set up
all
now
good, man.
with
It
my
happens.
new software, it should be a lot less of a pain to get it set up again. But thanks so much for all your patience. Had a blast. Hope you guys enjoyed it too. We should do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Awesome. We got to do more stuff.
Do more stuff.
And this time I don't want it to take 2 years.
Good.
You got to check your Twitter DMs or something. I was like DMing you trying to get something going like last month, and then you messaged me on something else, and it's like, you didn't read my fucking message, did you?
Alrighty. Well, I didn't create my outro slide, so it's going to end abruptly. So thanks so much, guys. See you later.
Thanks for coming, everybody.
Bye.